the presentation before we ask questions, but some of them may indicate that they're happy to take questions on the way through. But just be mindful that actually sometimes the answers to your early questions come in the presentation. So just to keep things moving and to keep staff, respectful staff and respect for the topic, if we can try and keep some of the major discussion to be finished. Thank you. Right. So item 2 is apologies. We have 2 apologies, one from Councillor Morrison and we have one from Councillor Rodway, but I see he's with us.
Yes, I am, Madam Chair. I've just tested positive again for COVID, so I can't go to get my hospital appointment. So I'll join you from the safety of my home.
Oh, goodness me, Morris. You have our sympathies. Thank you. So would somebody like to move the apology of Councillor Morrison, please? Thanks, Councillor McPhail. Seconded, Councillor Evans. All those in favour, please say aye. Against. Carried. Thank you. Any declarations of interest? Strange universe, that one. Item 4 is public forum petitions and deputations. Confirmation of the minutes of the 14th of September. Somebody who was. Yeah, thank you, Councillor. Chairman Horan. I'll second for those. Thanks, Councillor Roy. Any changes or additions or questions? Thank you. I'll put that motion in. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against. Yes, thank you. Right, notification of extraordinary and urgent business. I've had none. Questions. I've had none. And very quickly, a report from me that the Southland Heritage Building and Preservation Trust, which I chair on your behalf, had its annual meeting on the 3rd of November, where we expressed our thanks to SDC's Cap and Cowie for their support and for ES staff support. The AGM was followed by a regular meeting, and it would be fair to say the Trust is evaluating its effectiveness in the heritage building community and whether its purpose is still relevant and still appropriate. So watch this space because I suspect there'll be some changes there. We're just evaluating that and talking to the people we need to talk to about whether the fund continues and if it does, how it does. So that would be my report. Item 8. Any other reports from councillors?
Very briefly, Madam Chair, and it's a forerunner for an Expo Council meeting. 3 of us attended the Zone 5 and 6 meeting in Nelson over the last couple of days, and I actually found it one of the better ones I'd had. It was certainly focused around incoming peers and mayors, but very good couple of days. But the 3 of us will do a more comprehensive report. There's only a lot going on up there, and but as usual with the conversations you have with others around the room, they're always valuable. But I'll leave it there and we'll do something a bit later.
Thanks, Chairman. It was a lovely 3 days. 2 days. Felt like longer.
1.5 days.
Okay. So we move to item 9, which is the election of deputy chair to the committee. Do we have any expressions of interest or any nominations?
Oh, maybe start the ball rolling with. Eventually, he'll be healthy enough to be a backup. But with Morris Rodway, would have deputy. The deputy normally doesn't have a lot of roles, but in these COVID times, you can't actually share a meeting by remotely, so that those roles may be a little more important. So I'll nominate Morris.
Happy to second that, although if we were dealing with COVID, maybe Morris is not the one.
To be
Dealing with it now.
Yeah, get it sorted, but that's as long as Morris would be happy to do it.
Oh, yes, thank you very much. I would, and I appreciate the nomination. Thank you. Certainly will get over this and be raring to go as soon as it's gone.
Maybe I should not say that I haven't had COVID yet, and so you might be having to step up sooner than expected. Morris, fingers crossed. I stay fine. Do we have any other nominations? Great. In that case, we don't need to have a vote, do we? No, so we just can declare. Thank you. So, yeah, it's my pleasure to declare Morris Ridley the Deputy Chair of the Strategy and Policy Committee. Thanks, Morris.
Thank you.
This takes us to the meaty part of the agenda, which is item 10.1. Welcome the emergency response and transition to long-term management of the sea squirt. I'm not even going to try and pronounce the Latin name, Ali.
Got to do it officially.
Pressure's on for you then, Peter. So, welcome, Ali, Catherine.
Morning. I'm not, Catherine and Ali are going to do the bulk of the talking. Didenium vexillium, all right? DVEX or Catholic Sea Squirt. Just for the new councillors, we've been communicating through the CEO's report when we were given the information that there could have been an incursion in Rockura, Stewart Island. We also, maybe 3 months ago, we had we communicated that externally as well, and basically this is the culmination of that response work. The reason we're in strategy and policy and not regional services is because whatever decision you make today involves potential amendments to the regional pest management plan. So that's why it sits here before you today. So I'll hand over to Ali and take you through the presentation.
Thanks, Ali.
Morning, everyone. So I'm Ali Mead. I'm the Biosecurity Biodiversity Operations Manager, and I've also got Catherine McLaughlin here. She's the team leader for Marine. So we're going to try and answer as many questions as we can. We're quite conscious that we don't normally bring biosecurity items to this committee, and we're quite conscious that we do have a few new councillors in the room that haven't had a biosecurity induction yet. So I am just going to very quickly try and flick through some basics of the Biosecurity Act, because understanding the basics of the Act will hopefully help you make a decision later on once we explain the incursions. So okay, so yeah, the all biosecurities work under the Biosecurity Act 1993, and we also have a secondary piece to that, which is the National Policy Direction. So anything we do in the pest management biosecurity space, we have to make sure we're following the Act. Here at Environment Southland, that basically means that we've set up 2 main plans. We have the Fiordland Marine Pathways Plan, which manages the pathways that pests and things could move into Fiordland, and we have the Southland Regional Pest Management Plan. That is the piece of legislation where all of the rules around different species that we believe could be a problem sit. Here at ES, we also have a non-regulatory strategy, which sits above them and says the direction we're going in, but the 2 main pieces of policy you need to be aware of are the Pathways Plan and the RPMP. And as I said, any changes to them, the way they're formed is all done under the Biosecurity Act. So I'm going to try and keep jargon down to an absolute minimum, but there are a few things that you need to be aware of. In the Biosecurity Act, the word pest is only an organism specified in the plan. So if it's not named in the plan, the species, it's not a pest. So wasps might be a nuisance, but they're not a pest, things like that. So just be really careful to use the word pest. Pathway is another one that's got quite a specific meaning, and that's the movement that could potentially spread a harmful organism. So it can spread things that aren't pests, it can spread anything that could be harmful, could be a pathway. And management agency, so for our purpose here today, that's the council. So there are things within the Biosecurity Act that the management agency can make a decision on, there's things that the council can make a decision on, and then there's things that people with different delegations can. But the council has to make a decision on changes to our plans. It's only a council decision. So the national direction allows us to have a few different types of biosecurity programs. The first is an exclusion program. That is something that is not currently in the region. And we decide that we want to have rules to keep it out of the region, or we don't want it. The second is eradication. So it's something that's in the region, it's in really small numbers, and we think we can get rid of it within the lifetime. We've got 10 years from putting an eradication program in to get rid of it totally from the region. Progressive containment, they're things that are reasonably widespread, but they're not everywhere, and we might be able to keep them, or there's a reason for trying to stop them spreading further. Sustained control, they're everywhere, and all we can do is keep numbers down and try and reduce the amount of harm they can do. If you look at the graph on the screen, this is going up as how much space is occupied, and this is the time it's been here. The longer things are in the region, the wider spread they generally get, the more harm they do, the harder they are to control. Really good biosecurity happens around the bottom of the curve, exclusion and eradication, stopping things become a problem. Once they get to containment, sustained control, they're incredibly expensive, they're really hard to contain, and all we can do is just try and keep a lid on them. So we try as much as possible to work in this space. We also have the ability to do two other types of program. One is site-led, that's around place-based control. So if something has got particular values that we really want to protect, it might have particularly cultural significance or ecological values, we want to put specific rules in that place, we can as a site-led program. The only place in Southland we currently have that is Rakiura. And then the last one is pathways management. So for us, we've got the Field and Marine Pathways Plan, and that is around, as I said earlier, stopping the movement of things rather than stopping the species itself. So they are our options, or main options when it comes to biosecurity management. So where are we at with our Didenium vexillum incursion? So this is an exclusion species in the RPMP. It was put into the original strategy in 2002 and made it into the new plan in 2019. Its common name is carpet sea squirt. It is this organism here. It's an animal and it's from Japan, and it can spread through larvae in the water, and it can also break off and spread. It kind of coats things, it becomes an issue. So it wasn't known to be in Southland. We have an objective to exclude it, which is to stop it establishing, making it Southland. Now, back earlier in the year, we had a report from a consent holder saying that they thought they'd seen it in the Rakiura waters. So we went and took some samples. It's really hard to identify. There's lots of very similar native species, so it did take a specialist up in NIWA helping us, but we got confirmation in July that it is the Didenium vexillum carpet sea squirt that we're dealing with. Really grateful to the consent holders for reporting this. There are eyes and ears on the ground, so really great that they saw something that they weren't used to seeing and they reported it. So since we got the original report, the first report was in Horseshoe Bay, and then we quickly got a second one from Big Glory Bay. We immediately went out and we took some samples. Samples went to the lab for confirmation. We then worked on some delimitation. So luckily we've got a dive team now working on the end area, and they weren't very busy over winter, so we were able to bring them into Rakiura. And we also got support from Otago University and Bay of Plenty, because they're more used to dealing with this type of organism. And we did some big surveys. Because this is something very new to the region, we brought in as much technical advice as we could, and we've had help from Cawthron, the aquaculture industry, experts that are used to dealing with this thing, and from Mana Whenua around actually what are we going to do. We asked them specifically to look at the impact that it could have in Southland, and we looked at different control methods. So what have we found? So the first thing, I guess, is to say that from talking to people, it seems that this thing has been in our environment for probably quite a few years, and that we only saw it more this summer because of the marine sea temperatures and the heat wave, and maybe it bloomed a bit this year. So it's potentially been in the environment for quite a long time. We've only just found it. The delimitation survey was actually quite positive in some respects. So the original Horseshoe Bay sample, we did an extra set of DNA work on it, and it came back not as Didenium vexillum. So that's now been clear. And Horseshoe Bay, all of our other sampling, we didn't find any. Half Moon Bay, we were really concerned particularly about the boats and anything that could move it or any structures. All of our sampling from Half Moon Bay came back clear. Didn't find any in Half Moon Bay. Oh, big files. Unfortunately, the results from further down at Patterson Inlet isn't quite so positive, so it's quite hard to see on this screen. But Big Glory Bay, pretty much everywhere we checked, has got carpet sea squirt through it, and that's including on structures. It's including on bits of natural substrate, so fallen logs and things like that that are in the environment. Anywhere where it can settle and grow, it is beginning to grow. So we weren't finding lots. It was winter. It's at its lowest point, but it was definitely spread throughout. We also found it in other locations around Patterson Inlet, and including on some of the wharfs. So the wharfs where some of the main boats, Golden Bay Wharf and things like that. So it's in the environment and potentially getting onto boats and moving around. The further inland and Patterson Inlet and towards the western side, it was clear, but there is a big concentration. So we have fed everything we know back into the technical advisory group, and they have I think it's just really big maps, so it's just struggling. Yeah. So as I said, we wanted to get some technical advice. When we originally looked at it, putting it into the RPMP, we thought that it would have a really negative impact on the environment when it came here. Now, since we did that analysis, Didenium vexillum has become established elsewhere in the country, particularly in Marlborough. And those regions have been able to watch and see what it actually does. And they're actually finding that it's not doing that much harm. So it's a bit of a nuisance, but it doesn't really spread much beyond the agriculture and beyond sort of fallen logs. It's sort of found a neutral balance. So what they're saying from an ecological perspective and from an economic perspective is that it's not really the impact that they're expecting, and they're not that worried about it. It's not doing that much damage. We were a little bit worried about cultural harvest, but again, it's not actually killing off the mussel beds and things like that. So the impact is expected to be low. The tag also said that from looking at what happened in Marlborough and looking at what happened elsewhere around the world when this thing has moved around, eradication isn't really feasible. There's no good way of killing it. They spent million or over $1 million up in Marlborough trying to get rid of it and weren't able to. There's no good way of getting rid of it. But that doesn't mean that all hope is lost. And there was very strong guidance that, yeah, it's in Big Glory. Yeah, we can't get rid of it from Big Glory. But if we got good pathways management in place and do what we can to stop human-induced spread, we might be able to stop it getting into other bits of the region. We don't think it's as big an environmental problem from what we know from elsewhere in the country, but places like Fiordland have got very different ecology. We've got our amazing corals and things like that, and we don't know what will happen if we get onto those corals. So we're better at least keeping some form of stopping it get out if we can, rather than just letting it go. So try and protect our high value areas. When they were looking at that advice, they sort of looked, well, what does that mean for Southland? It means we're going to have really good cleaning rules, and it means that anybody going in and out of Big Glory needs to be kept clean, things like that. And they looked at our current situation and suggested that actually, and I don't think this will be a surprise to anybody because we've been talking about block fallout for a while, it's quite hard to get your vessel clean in Southland. So that is something we need to keep finding good solutions for. And we need to keep working with part of the coastal plan review on making sure that cleaning of vessels is appropriate for biosecurity purposes as well when we do a coastal plan review. And then the main piece of advice was that we just need to keep doing really good communication around vessel biosecurity and promoting good practice. So the more that we can make sure people clean as they go in and out of different areas, keep the boats in really good nick, the less chance that either Didenium Vexillum or anything else is spoiled. So we have looked at that advice and what it means in terms of policy and what in terms of our response. And we are recommending that we probably need to make a change to the RPMP. So a little bit more Biosecurity Act. A minor change can be made to the RPMP or the Regional Pathways Plan within section 100G4 if council can make a resolution that they have to be confident that they won't have a significant effect on persons' rights and obligations and that it's not inconsistent with the policy direction. So councillors that were here for the last trimester will know that we use this to make spelling errors before and to remove corrections in the RPMP. But so we can do it if it is non-minor. So if it's deemed to have a significant effect or if it's not consistent with the national policy direction, we need to follow a 100D process. That is quite a large process. It's essentially the same process we follow to put a plan in place in the first place. So we'll have to come up with a proposal. We'll have to do lots of cost-benefit analysis. We'll have to do public consultation and potentially go through hearings. So it takes about 6 different steps, but anything that's non-minor, we do need to go through that process. So we have been working on 5 different options that we think council should consider. The first option is that we do just try and manage it and we do stick to our original pest management plan objective and we try and exclude it, so re-eradicate it from the region. That goes against the TAG advice because they don't think that's possible. From what we know from Marlborough, that's going to cost us significant amounts of money, potentially in the millions. So that's not our staff recommendation. The second option is that we do retain it in the RPMP, but we change it as an exclusion in the area. So we take Big Glory Bay essentially out and say that we accept that it's going to be in Big Glory Bay, but we try and exclude it for the rest of the region. That would mean the existing rules are still in place, and it would mean that if it did escape and got somewhere else, we would potentially be looking and doing delimitation and trying to look at what the impacts and things are, and we would be monitoring for it. So over the summer, we would be trying to see how's it got into Fiordland and try and do a little bit of extra work. We believe that this is the best temporary solution for this. This is the thing that we can do now that we can then start working towards better outcome, but will bring the RPMP in line with what we're trying to do. I'm going to skip option 3 because it's a bit more complicated and I want to talk about it more. Option 4 is that we just remove it from the RPMP and go no longer a pest. We can't control it. We don't want to have any rules in place. We just take it out. And that's not our recommended option because we think that we can do some pathways management or something to protect them. The 5th one is that we essentially just ignore it and we accept that we're not going to meet the plan and we just do nothing. So option 3 is a little bit more complicated. But what we're proposing for this is probably the best long-term solution. And if we do option 2 first as our immediate action and then move on to option 3 over the next years to actually look at long-term management approach. So this would give us the time to go through a full 100D review process if we needed to. It would give us time to look at actually what does good marine biosecurity management in Southland look like in terms of different types of programs. Is this better managed as progressive containment? Is it better managed by pathways management? Are we better trying to manage by species? Are we better trying to manage by pathway? It allows us to do some really good research into that, some good thinking. We would have to do some good cost benefit analysis of each of the different options we come up with, and we would have to do some consultation. But if you're thinking that that's going to happen over the next 2 to 3 years, we could have the best outcome. One of the reasons that we think this is the best thing to be going towards is that it ties in with a whole heap of other work and it starts actually bringing our strategy for marine biosecurity into one place rather than having different things all over the place. So the Fjord and Marine Pathways Plan is up for a 5-year review this year, so we need to review that anyway. So if we throw what we now know about DVEX into that review, we might come up with might change our pathways plan. The coastal plan review is also underway, and as I've already said, a lot of the TAG advice was around making sure we consider that in our in the coastal plan review. We've also got MPI managing Bonamia in the region. So they are using the Biosecurity Act to have controlled area notice in place around Victoria Bay for Bonamia. So if we tie what their restrictions are into this as well and actually have a really good conversation with them, we might be able to come up with something simpler and better for everybody that does the job of both of them. And by going down this approach, we can start looking at pathways management. Hopefully we can get into a position where we're managing good pathways that's preventing any species moving around that we don't want, rather than chasing our tail for individual species when they come in and out of the region. Hopefully that makes sense. I know it's an awful lot to take in for your first strategy and policy meeting, and it's not an act everyone's used to, but happy to answer questions. But yeah, our recommendation is do option 2 for now, and then let staff work with option 3 over the next couple of years and come back with a long-term proposal.
Thanks, Ellie.
Any questions?
There are some, I'm sure. I've got Robert and then Eric. Sorry, Councillor Guyton and Councillor Rory.
Thanks. A few things.
Yeah.
I'll try and keep it to 2. First one is we already have a pathways program in place. It clearly hasn't worked. Secondly, in my view, it seems quite specific that this organism's turned up where it has rather than more generally. So the pathway seems to be between Marlborough and there through the salmon industry, it seems to me. It may not be the case. However, that's not my point. My question is around capacity. And I know that with pest plants, as we find more and more, we have to drop them off the bottom, basically, in terms of management. And is this happening in the marine environment as well, with this new one coming in? Are we looking at letting some go at the other end?
So on the first point, the pathways plan doesn't cover Rakiura at the moment. So it's only the RPMP, the pathways plan only covers Portland. On the second bit, we need it. This isn't, our recommendations on this aren't being driven by staff capacity. It's being driven by the fact that we really don't think we can eradicate it. And if I believed that we had a chance, I would be sitting in front of you saying, I want $1 million and I think we should be doing it and I want throw me staff. I genuinely don't think that throwing money at this is going to help, and that's breaks my heart a bit, but I think that's the situation we're in. I think if we go down the option 3 approach and we start looking at all of these different strings of marine biosecurity, we need to have some really good, honest conversations around what can we achieve in the biosecurity marine space and what sort of capacity and resource do we need to do that, and where are the gaps and do we need to fill things in. It's been absolutely great having divers from the Jobs for Nature program over the last 2 years. We've only got another something. I don't know if you've got anything in that.
I think yes. I think the marine space is more challenging than, you know, in my brief time here. I've learned a lot, and it's a pretty full-on work. And when the funding ends for Jobs for Nature, that some of that work will have to end. So there's there's staff giving some consideration to that. But yeah, I think this is a sensible, pragmatic option. Allows us. We've still got resources to do the surveys or the monitoring, and we can work towards a long-term solution, which I think will probably be most pragmatic.
Councillor Rory.
Thank you. I've got a few questions too, but I'll try and limit them. Firstly, thank you for your fulsome explanation of what's there. First question I'd raise, and you don't have to answer, is again the signals that our monitoring of marine invasive pests is perhaps not good enough. It comes after Bonamia and Undaria and possibly Styaloclava and maybe a few other things that we still are to find. And I think there's a lesson somewhere in our whole thing. We've dealt with this, particularly in high-risk travel areas. There needs to be better monitoring. I'll just make that point. Reading the paper and seeing that it does spread by algal form, option 2 doesn't seem to have a lot of merit to me, because it's unlikely that it got transferred from outside the region to all of those yellow dots that you've got on the map. So I'm kind of supportive of option 3. So my questions are, where in the world has it been successfully eliminated? And is that possible? Reading the paper again, smothering seems to be either by weed mat or dumping substrate or some clean substrate on it seems to be the only thing we know about it. And there's another question that if this is of significant risk to fiordland, is there a national pot of money that we can dip into, because this is not budgeted work?
So as far as I know, it hasn't been successful elsewhere in the world. There have been multiple attempts when it's got into different regions. They found up in Marlborough that when they smothered everything, it worked quite well, and then it just reinfested and started growing on the thing that they were trying to smother it with. So there is no good way of killing this thing. It's a very successful pest. What was the second bit of the question? Oh, and funding. Yes, so this is not an unwanted organism from MPI. MPI did help us with the initial response in terms of advice and stuff, but it is not something that they see as a priority for the country. It's not an unwanted organism. It is a regional pest. It's in our plan. It's our problem, not their problem. So no. And we don't know what the impact on Fiordland will be. Fiordland might be fine.
Thank you.
Chairman Horrell.
Yes, Madam Chair, I mean, this has obviously been there for some time, and probably brought clean holes for Fiordland, but I'm not sure what was looking at it, but we knew when we brought out in our clean holes pathways that it would only be moderately successful in these other areas as well. So, and it's pretty obvious that most of these organisms are coming in on the holes. So I'll probably agree with the recommendations. We go with 2, move to 3, but obviously we want more education out there for people to report stuff when they see it. But we also want a bit more monitoring of, that moorings, wharfs, etc. Other places we tend to find the invariants, we find I am mindful of that. The measure MPI quarterly funding from Bluff. And areas now endemic. We need to learn a little bit from the past, but we've got Bonomia going on as well. But I guess the signal is what can we learn from this, and we work with other entities to have a more comprehensive monitoring situation. Because we know the places it normally turns up. It is at moorings, it is at wharves. And most of these things are coming in on the
Thanks, Chairman. I've got Councillor McDonald, Mr. Bull, and then Councillor Guyton again, and then me. Thanks, Councillor McDonald.
Really good. Makes common sense, doesn't it, to do it?
not down in previous support.
Not that we know of, but Rakia is a really large place to survey, and we're going to try and get some additional surveying Fiordland this year. But just the surveying we did took a week.
What's the likelihood that we'll keep it? So I like your idea of doing the important stuff now while we can, those pathways. And making sure it doesn't do that. And doesn't do that. We had a really high profile prosecution late last year, and that was really good. I think that would have straightened the backs of a lot of people. So it's good. So really common sense approach, sort of support that.
That's what it was for.
Oh, yeah, I support the direction we're taking, but I just touch on the pathways plan and how it can be suggested it's not working. I'd say it's not, the pathways plan's not working. I'd say maybe it's a failing of, I'd say the shareholders of Southport are not providing facilities to be able to haul out, both to be able to clean their boats in the first place, and when they do haul them out, they're just washing it back in the tide again. So those haul out operations down there are non-compliant. And so I would say the failing of the shareholder was doubtful. And not like you've got a pathway plan in place, and there's no way of them actually hauling the boats out and keeping them clean anyway. And most of the time they're, as I say, it's just washing straight back in the tide and reattaching itself to boat hulls that are in and around the Port Bluff. And there is no compliant slipway in Murihiku this time. So we have all the pathway plans we like, but if those facilities are not there to accommodate them, and I mean, this is just the start of these invasive species, I would suggest, coming into NZ. I heard a report this morning about the sea snake in our waters, just the changing water temperatures and such like. So we expect, and I suggest we might prepare ourselves for not only this, but more invasive species coming at us. So those are facilities certainly need to be seriously looked at. Kia ora.
Thanks. Mr. Holst, did you want to comment on that particular?
Yeah, I just thought it might be helpful just to let the new council know that we've been looking at, I think there's been a haul out facility project on the books for a wee while. So I think, and that's something that Ali and I have been exploring. So it's probably, whilst I don't have too much more to update, we've been having conversations with a number of, let's say, stakeholders. It's probably timely that at some point I'll bring you a bit of an update around how we think we might be able to progress. Not without challenges, but certainly probably timely to give you an update.
Thank you. Chairman Harold, did you want to comment on that particular point?
That was that particular point, yes, and like we did think we had something off the ground several years ago between ICC and ourselves. But Stuart makes a very good point that you've only got Southport's big lift out thing. I don't think there's anything in Dunedin we're sorely short of facilities, and there was going to be a haul out facility which would have abundant area, and it seems to have fallen off the radar. I think we do need to have that conversation with Southport, with the ICC, and try and progress it, because unless we've got the facilities that can access timely and not too expensively, the whole thing fails. So yeah, I certainly recommend that we progress in that.
Okay, Councillor Guyton, did you?
Just very quickly.
Yeah,
sure. I think we've had sea snakes found in Southland already, Stuart, in the past. Just a point about the amount of energy and action we put into place as it predicates, I'm presuming, on the number 2 Fiordland. Would that be a fair comment?
Going forward,
Yeah.
I think from what I understand from what the technical guys said, I think Fiordland, if anything's going to, the most potential harm is Fiordland because of those corals and because of the way the ecosystem. And I think the sub-Antarctics were also raised.
I'm wondering then, ought we not to take some of this animal over to Fiordland in a contained area and see if it does thrive? Because if it doesn't, you see what I mean?
Yeah,
We're going to commit to the amount of work or money. I really want to know, is the threat real, or is your modelling sufficiently robust that you can confidently say? That's what I'm asking.
Yeah, I think that's probably a question I need to take back to our technical advisory group. I don't know how. Yes, potentially it's a good question. I don't know how we would do it, but yeah.
Yeah, there's options really.
I guess just with that as well, we'd be going against our own RPP rules by moving it around. So that's obviously that component.
Good point. Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
From over here.
Or a lab or something.
Yeah.
We will talk to the scientists if they can come up with.
Thank you. Just my final 2 cents worth. I was actually going to ask how we could leverage the situation to get that cleaning facility progressed. So thanks for raising that, Stuart. The other thing is that
Chair, can I just It's interesting, really interesting, because we've got a floating dock. I believe it belongs to ES for emergency purposes. But it's not being made available to anyone that could be used to actually clean some of these boats, but it's only there for emergency purposes. And I'm just suggesting there is a, but that can be part of the.
Yeah, I think
Anyway,
I'd like to give you, we've spoke to ICC, the original location, where the ICC ramp was, I'm not sure, again, that's the best location, so we've gone and looked at other locations. It's a project on the book. I need to probably give you a pretty basic update, and I probably need to seek some direction from council around next steps. So.
And looking at multiple options. I would suggest.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Bull. Very quickly, Councillor Evans.
Sorry. So the pathway for this to move is through vessels and through interactions with commercial fishery and also recreational fishery. And stuff to moorings moving towards. When it's found on moorings, anyway, I can't use it, with the sign. Yeah, can we limit? Recreational fishermen in the Korea and other areas. A lot of times that may just be them staying outside the transfer.
We could technically put a controlled area notice over, so we could say, and we did it in Breaksea for a while for Andaria, we could say, put like a no overnight clause or a you can't use this wharf.
I think it'll be prudent because this is not going to be the last thing. And the next thing may not be vessels or movement like unions that cause spreads. Sure, we can have a great facility at Southport for cleaning hulls. The next thing might not need that. Stop it now. I would really suspect that we could have an overarching. Yeah.
So just a bit of additional background on that is there is already a controlled area notice in place over for Bonamia. It currently just covers aquaculture, but Biosecurity New Zealand are currently consulting, and you guys will see a paper in a couple of weeks when I finish writing it around the consultation around extending that can to cover all recreational fishes in Great Glorious Bay. So it is something we can do, but from what I've seen, from what MPI are doing, we're actually going to inadvertently benefit from their work. So I don't think putting 2 cans is, but we can have another look at it.
There is an issue with that as well, as it's on a lot of the mooring lines around Golden Bay, and there's boats that sit on them sort of semi-permanently, and it's almost one of the only places you can do that. So there may be issues around the mix of not being sail moorings for those longer stay vessels outside of Victoria.
Thank you. Just before I put the recommendations, the other question I had was the financial implications for option 2. You mentioned staff time on page 19 for those of you who are flipping. Would there be any extra costs and resources on as well as staff time, like legal costs, etc.? Will that be a consideration or not?
Yeah, so for option 2, I've already got some, while preparing the paper and the options, I got some legal advice, and from what we're currently proposing, the advice was we can do option 2 as a minor change. So it would take very little staff time, and we wouldn't need the second. We've already got the legal advice on it. If we want to do anything more than just changing the geographical extent, then we would have to do some more thinking and then maybe come back and see is it is a minor change or a major change. But as it currently is, done the legal advice and it's
Great, thanks. Paul, did you have something to say?
Were you thinking operationally as well?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, I think got the benefit of the resource that we can call on, and operationally, whatever that means for us, we'll manage with the existing budgets.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, so let's just remind ourselves of the recommendations, please. First one is to adopt option 2, that is to retain de vexillum. in the Southland Regional Pest Management Plan as an exclusion pest, but reduce the geographical extent of the rules. And 2, instruct staff to start a formal process to begin the planning and feasibility work required to implement option 3 in the long-term planning process. Is somebody willing to move that recommendation?
I'll move that.
Thank you, Councillor McDonald, seconded Chairman Horrell.
Happy to second it, Madam Chair. I think that's probably the only way forward. That 2 is sort of a holding mechanism, and 3, but we are still trying to talk about it. And so I think it's happy.
Thank you. Any further? Right. Put that motion then. All those in favour, please say aye.
Right.
Carried. Thank you. Thanks. Oh, sorry.
I'm just wondering if because I've been having a sidebar question.
Yes.
Which is that it says geographic extent of the rule, we need to be more specific about where that is.
Do you like us to bring, we should probably bring a map.
Yes.
So from here, where these minutes will go up to council for approval, the next step in this process would be to bring something back to council specifically. Right, thank you.
So the recommendations wording is okay. Great. Okay. So that was carried. Thank you. Really appreciate the comprehensive work. Team, thank you very much. And we are spot on time. Go us.
Because you don't really need to be.
Item 2 is a submission on the National Direction for Plantation and Exotic Carbon Forestry. Staff going to take us through this. Lucy, super Lucy, all yours. Thank you.
So thanks to the policy and planning team for writing the submission. Sadly, everybody's being plagued by sickness today, so Shona is not available. So I'll talk you through the item and then happy to take any further comments on the draft submission that was circulated on Monday. We've been working on this joint submission with Southland District Council. It relates to proposed changes for the NES, the National Environmental Standard for Plantation Forestry. We had a workshop with yourselves on the 2nd of November to talk through both the details of the changes that are being proposed and also to seek councillors' input into our submission. The same has been done with staff at Southland District Council. Just wanted to highlight one point of clarification around the stringency. At the workshop, we discussed the fact that we are allowed to make more stringent policies in regards to the NESPF, but I wasn't explicit about the fact that it only relates to certain matters. So one of the matters that we can't have more stringent rules on is in relation to wild and pines. And given the discussion at the workshop, we've included specific reference to that as part of the submission to seek further changes to the NESPF to allow us to be more stringent in regards to those areas. The next steps from today, following the conversation with yourselves, is that the final changes to the submission, including editorial checks such as spelling and grammatical ones, which there are a couple of that I've spotted. And so a good chairwoman spotted also. So those checks will happen following today, as well as any further comments that you would like included. And then the submission deadline is Friday. I'm happy to take any questions, and certainly for if you weren't able to attend the workshop, if there's any points of clarification that you would like me to make.
Thanks, Lucy. Just a reminder, councillors, that the bulk of this work is done. So absolutely questions and suggestions, but revisiting the whole discussion is not necessarily the point of this. Okay, so just absolutely questions are encouraged, and we hear one from Councillor McDonald. Thank you. Okay, that's fine.
I'm just going to go through a few things here. Wildfire risk is huge. That's quite an assumption, to be honest. I don't know where we've got that from. So large, using words like large scale wildfire in South in regards to plantation forestry, I'm unsure about that. I don't know where it's come from. So also go to QA2 on page will be on. These are the questions. Talking about the pests and animal species such as pigs, deer, and possum. I think let's go to, we really haven't clearly defined what we're trying to do here, to be honest. Carbon forestry, are we talking about permanent carbon forestry? Or are we talking about restrictions on production carbon forestry? So any trees that go on the ground, we must assume now, new trees will be in the emissions trading scheme. So that's a production carbon basis, or are we talking about a permanent category, which is, they call it shut the gate and walk away. So when I see the pests talk about that, most definitely on a permanent rotation, and wildfires due to you just have to bear with me. I'm sorry, everybody here.
Sorry, Councillor McDonald, it would be easier if we, if you want a response to any of your points, that we stop and respond to them, or do you want to go through them
No, this
first?
is the form to do it, really.
Yeah, yeah.
I'll be as quick as I can, but
So you want to go through all of them first and then come back?
I've got a couple more, but
Yep.
I think it's important.
Yeah. No, I'm not suggesting we won't cover them off. I'm just wondering if you want some comment as you go. That's okay.
There's no rule to deal with water yield, so there's been significant scientific work done on water yield. It's sitting there anyway, and also transitioning exotic forest to indigenous forests is work been done there. And wildfire risk, ponds and roading, access when it comes to forest fires is the most important thing. So most ponds that I've visited in forests have long since silted up, you can walk across. So if we get the ponds and the roads in there, we must have a way of inspecting them, make sure they're functional. So that's it. Other than that, that's pretty good, but yeah, I'll just say on that. Two categories, what are we trying to do really?
You expect a response?
Well,
So on the, I can certainly reference the thought by which we were talking about the risk of wildfires. That did come up from a couple of councillors during the workshop as the concern. So in terms of the scale of that risk, I think from other places we would be comfortable to say there is an increasing risk of wildfires. To your point about the monitoring of the mechanisms to minimise the risk, we can definitely address that as part of the changes to the submission. On your point around production versus plantation to QA2, in terms of what they're trying to do, to be caught by this particular National Environmental Standard, it relates purely to plantation. So there has to be that element of rotation. It's not talking about permanent forests. There has to be so it has,
including permanent.
no, it wouldn't be caught as part of the plantation forestry NES. There'd be other routes by which you can manage those, but it wouldn't be.
Well, all the things I've discussed is the risk sits in within permanent. Walk away forestry.
But also in plantation forestry.
Also, but the majority of the risk is in permanent. Shut the gate and walk away.
I have Mr. Bolt and then Councillor Roy. Yeah, no, I'll take Stuart first.
I was just wanting to respond to the wildfire risk. Can I say recently we had a report from Penny Nelson, the DG Conservation. She reported to the Conservation Board that NIWA has apparently got a report out that was suggesting that by 2050 we can be expecting to be watching our bush burning winter and summer. And so I think for me that report was will make up for it. In it's the same, Pete, the ponds are already drying out. Why are they drying out? And it's the start of the whole place drying out and getting ready to experiment, I guess. Anyway, I just wanted to share that. So NIWA has been doing quite considerable, they must have been doing quite considerable work in that regards to wildfire risk.
Thank you. I've got Councillor Roy, Chairman Horrell, and then Councillor Guyton.
If we're wanting to identify risk of plantation production forestry, I think there needs to be a comment somewhere about suitability. We talked about wind and fire, but snow risk. I've just come back yesterday from Roxburgh and looking at significant plantations of Douglas fir that have been snow damaged into ramicorns and all sorts of other ramicorn stubble leader. Sorry, just slip that in. And a range of things. So some comment about suitability of snow risk in production forestry as well.
Single leaders or a unicorn.
They are real. Chairman Horrell.
Yes, Madam Chair, I guess some of the focus here is that firstly, we want all planting to be at least under the current ENES, which strengthen. They are supposed to be going for a review at the moment, and I think probably the more stringency around wildings at the moment. There's no particular responsibility once they go over the fence, and we know the cost that's been incurred trying to stop the spread. And at least the plantation forestry are normally putting in the roads and normally putting in the ponds. And my real concern has been that carbon forestry at the moment is pretty much unfettered, and that's the real concern. It's the concern about whole properties being planted, health risks on roads that are going to be frosty in the wintertime, and all the rest of it. And we sort of mentioned in the, it's possibly not part of the submission, but as we heard from Warren Fuel the other day, even government, I think, are starting to move towards a regional response. So you have an NES, but the ability on a regional basis put something over the top. And I think that's where this thing should land. So I'm not sure if is that part of the submission to suggest that or not?
So through the chair, that Rachel had been following up with him following the conversation, and he wasn't able to share the details of the call with us, but he is going to share the draft submission. So once we haven't done it yet, so I'm not sure if there is overlap, but he's going to take you to see it before we submit that.
One of my concerns is that the original knee-jerk responsibility from ministers was, we didn't think farmers would want consent, everything consented. We don't want that. We actually want to encourage people to plant trees in the right place. But if you wanted to plant whole farms with the associated risk, you don't have the fire rate and everything else. We want to put in enough rules to discourage that. And I think as soon as you had something like that, you're going to get people who are going to say, well, we might have to sell off the neighbour and perhaps swap some land. At the end of the day, the mantra of the right tree in the right place is absolutely where we want to be. We do want to encourage natives to be planted in some of those riparian and steepy gullies. After looking at where pines are in Nelson the other day, I was quite aghast and thinking, how do you harvest them and how do you stop even falling in the gully if you get rainfall just afterwards? But probably not.
Chairman, Councillor Guyton.
Thank you. Just quickly, I agree with what Nicole's saying there about the need for, rules or at least guidance. I just think that we're nowhere near understanding the issue properly, and particularly around the wildfire problem, which is going to be devastatingly massive, I would suggest. But the approach we're taking now is talking about road access or ponding. It's totally going to fall way shorter than it needs to be. The answer, from a forester's point of view, is more trees, a greater variety of trees, and trees which are fire resistant planted through these. And I don't hear any of these ideas coming through. Nicole is correct in that we need to be giving guidance for our own protection, basically. We just don't seem to be up at a level of thinking about what's ahead that encompasses that. So I think good on us for doing this. I just don't feel that it's coming anywhere near what's necessary.
Councillor, is there anything else you would like included in the submission.
Don't see how that would be helpful at this stage. My suggestion might not fit.
I've been keeping an eye on hands up. And now Morris has one, thank you. Councillor Rodway.
Oh, thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, I've had a read through the Lucy's paper, and I think it covers everything. I agree with Nicole and Robert. I think the controlled activity status for plantation forestry, particularly exotic forestry, over a certain proportion of a property is something that we should look at pretty closely, and I assume that something like that will eventually develop, so that not only is the cost put back on the owner and not borne by everybody else, but there can be some conditions put on these large forestry blocks that cover majority of a property, so that the issues that Robert and Nicole and others have mentioned can be addressed. I think that's important. Thank you.
Thank you. So given some small additions and alterations.
Just one further.
Yep.
So in response to, and thank you for helpers. In terms, SDC's apparently done some mapping for EMS in terms of the wildfire risk. So we can certainly bring further information to yourselves to talk about that more beyond the submission. But you're right, I don't think we necessarily need to strengthen it much more than the other points.
Great. Sorry, Councillor McFarlane.
Yeah, sorry, just a quick question. Just in that QA2 about the extra environmental issues, and Peter brought it up. Obviously, under our regional pest plan, they have to have plans in place. That actually Southlands is reasonably well prepared for these forestry. I know there was discussion at Osprey, Otago, we're going, what's going to happen with all these pests, and they were questioning it, but we actually were told Southlands actually got it in place. Anybody's putting forestry in has to look after those pests. So I was just saying that Southlands should be promoting that. We have a thing in place if it needs to be done around the other regions. And with the wild, yeah, I'm probably more like Peter, and Peter's probably speaking from many decades of experience and just understanding what these fires will do. Our climate will be changing, and we need to be prepared for that. But I don't know whether we're too stressed about the whole country going on fire, but that's my opinion. Maybe DOC needs to have a look at some of their, if they've got a bit of wilding pine and thing, they might need to control their own controls up there too. But I do understand that it could be in the future as the climate changes. We need to be prepared for that. But I think there's going to be rules put in place that might curtail some of this forestry in the future. It'll be strategic planting also than block whole farm, which I think needs to be done personally anyway.
Sure, closing comment, thank you.
Oh, yeah, look, I've got a page here of issues, I suppose, and maybe I just share that page with Lucy rather than going to such we have to.
All of us, share it with all of us,
Yeah.
please.
Yeah. Yep.
Thank you. So no substantive changes to the submission.
That's fine.
Councillors, would you like to see the submission before it's sent through on the 18th?
Please.
I think we should, given that it's going to be amended by a number of comments around
Yes,
here.
exactly.
Yeah.
Thank you. So the recommendation as it stands is to approve the joint submission
As amended.
as amended via email.
Can I just, sorry, maybe.
Yes, you were making, yes.
I want to be clear, so Stuart said he had this resolution of only requiring the staff to perhaps change something, Stuart, like he says.
I think it's still running along. It's just I guess supporting some commentary that's maybe it's just, I guess Lucy.
So would it be primarily for our own background information and illumination, or substantive changes?
Or the change, that's the question.
Yeah, I don't think there'd be any substantive changes.
Thank you. Are you comfortable with that?
Very comfortable. Would it be helpful to include within the submission itself elements where there is overlap or consistent messaging to include specific reference to that in our submission, that there's alignment?
Absolutely. If you can manage that in the 2 days you've got.
Or would it be wise that before we vote, before we make this decision, that we have a look at that, it's only a A4 page. Put our eyes across it.
Yeah.
Decide.
Oh, whatever we're going to do now.
One who runs first.
So in my head, we are recommending the submission with amendments that will be approved via email before Friday,
Yeah, but we haven't seen.
including the work that Stuart is sharing with us if need be.
Leaves it very open.
Yes. Councillor Chairman Horrell.
Does Stuart want to just give us, doesn't every,
What do you want to-
it'd be nice to know just.
Okay, yep, first go. Okay.
Thank you.
Endorsed by Te Ao Marama. So Ngāi Community have long concerned about the impacts of climate change as recorded in our iwi management plan to Tangi o Te Aoiwa. So just referencing, we've got referencing Te Tangi. We support tribal strategy direction on climate change response, both mitigation and adaptation measures. We recognise the significant role of forestry in offsetting greenhouse gas emissions. We also reconsider the benefits of pest management in Indigenous forests to support plant growth and increase the ability of our forests to absorb carbon emissions. We oppose the use of permanent exotic plantation forestry to offset emissions. We are concerned that offshore multinational countries are clothing our whenua using exotic species in an appropriate location, long-term management, without addressing long-term risks, like e.g. fire hazard risks. We do not oppose the use of harvest or exotic plantation forestry, provided these forests are located appropriately and managed in a manner that protects the quality of the water bodies. We support development of regional spatial planning that identifies where plantation forestry for harvest is appropriate, which may be exotic or Indigenous. We support sustainable harvest of Indigenous forestry. We support development of regional policy framework that prohibits the establishment of permanent exotic forests. We support the establishment of permanent Indigenous forests to offset emissions and provide additional biodiversity benefits, as well as benefits to storming water. We support development of a policy framework that encourages establishment of permanent Indigenous forests suited to ecological district in order to offset emissions and provide co-benefits.
Thank you. Councillor McDonald.
I think access is the most important thing that we should advocate for. That will go a long way to taking care of, we're worried about pest management. It will take a long way to take care of fires. We have fires. So I think that's the most important thing. But of course, foresters are extremely reluctant to put in large infrastructure a long way from harvest time. They normally do it closer to harvest. So that's going to be a hard one to do, isn't it? So if we ascertain when the greatest risk of a fire is in an emerging forest, maybe we can specify in the first third of a rotation that there must be roading infrastructure and ponding infrastructure put in by a certain time, something along those lines. So that's the key, is access, I feel.
Oh.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just wanting to check, because I realise the conversation was about whether this needed another round of conversation. As now that we've heard Stuart's report, and it's consistent with, I think, the information that's come for the preparation of this paper. I would suggest that this committee agrees and that that's the last conversation before it goes out on Friday. If that's acceptable, that would be my sign.
Absolutely is for me, but I'll check with councillors
Could
that
we
we
just have that bit from Stuart about the exotic forestry, what you're saying there, I'm not sure that that is just aligned precisely with where the council's sitting. You just read that bit again, Stuart, if you wouldn't mind.
A copy of that, could that be sent around? Please?
Sorry?
Would Stu be able to send that around?
Sorry, excuse me, councillors, just checking with staff that has already been considered in the submission.
Yeah, it has been previously submitted to council to Anka and Rachel's team as well as Ali's team, but it isn't specifically referenced in the submission.
That's my point,
So
precisely.
it would, I'm more than happy to have a look at it, the detail of it, but I don't think there's anything that's different.
Okay.
No, I don't, yeah, I think the key point is that it has actually been considered by
Yeah,
staff.
right.
We
Thank
just
you.
haven't necessarily referenced the source. Chairman Horrell will ask.
Just a question, will they read the applicants and themselves? I have read that because it's obviously been circulated, and the stuff you had in there. They would-
Sorry, pointing at you, Rebecca, apologies.
Kia ora koutou, ko Rebecca Blythe tuku ingoa, kawe mahiri a iwi with Te Ao Marama, supporting Stuart and Anne. We have met with Tront with regard to the submission that they're putting in and supplied them with the opposition statement, which is, as Stuart has read out. So from Papatū Runanga perspective, that's what we've fed to Tront to consider how they would read that in. So yes, but not in our own right, as Te Ao Marama. We just seek to influence wherever we can.
Thank you for clearing that up. Right. So after open and frank discussion, is somebody able to make the recommendation that council will resolve to approve the joint submission? The submission on the proposed changes to the National Direction of Plantation and Exotic Carbon Forestry within the National Environmental Standard for Plantation Forestry. Acknowledging, thank you.
I'll move the recommendation and suggest that Stuart's should be a part of that. There's no harm that comes from more than one source back to the ministry.
Yeah.
Reinforces the argument.
Thank you. Councillor Cook.
Can we get a, please, can we get a copy of that? I need to see it if we're gonna, if we're gonna put it added into here, I need to read it.
Well, just to
So
be clear though,
we're adding something else.
it has already been considered by staff in the submission, so it's just acknowledging. My understanding is it is acknowledging the source of that information in the submission. Okay, but absolutely not suggesting we don't see it. Thank you, Councillor Evans.
Highlighting our relationship.
Thank you. Are we all clear? All those in favour, please say aye. Against?
Aye.
Carried, thank you.
In the hand again.
Thank you. Submission on pricing agricultural emissions.
So the government is also seeking feedback at the moment on their options to price agricultural emissions. It includes both who will be affected by the change and how the price will be set. Again, we workshopped this with council on the 2nd of November, and that workshop has fed into the draft submission that is before you. Key points from the workshop are included in the covering paper in terms of high level elements that we took from yourselves and obviously fed through into the detailed submission. There's a lot less questions on this particular submission than for the previous items one, but I would just note a couple of matters in terms of the Waka-Kanoa partnership recommendations. We've mentioned a couple of times through the document that the council was very supportive of the partnership and supportive of the collaborative efforts that partnership undertook. And I know certainly Councillor Martin was keen that we highlighted the intentions for the partnership was that their recommendations as a whole were advanced. Given that the government's recommendations have taken both the partnership's advice as well as the Climate Change Commission's advice, it's obviously altered somewhat the recommendations, although not substantively or substantially, rather. We also talked at the workshop about the answer to question 10 within the submission in terms of the equitability of what they're currently proposing. So as to draw your attention to that particular part, hopefully that summarise the conversation to the appropriate level. And we also have made reference to the wider changes that are coming from a farm planning perspective and the desire for those to be integrated in a sensible and phased way. Happy to take any questions or further changes that you would like us to make to the submission.
Thank you. I've got Councillor Roy and Councillor Pemberton.
Okay, thank you, Lucy. I just got a wee concern over our first line, which says Environment Southland acknowledges that agriculture contributes over half the Aotearoa's total emissions. The science community, as far as I'm aware, is still debating the preciseness of it, and I would prefer us to have something like contributes significantly to, rather than taking the side of some of the scientists. You're going to oppose that, right?
Yeah, of course, it's my job.
Given that that might be a controversial statement, would somebody else like to comment on that particular point?
Oh,
Councillor Guyton.
not to contravene what Eric said, I understand totally your position. However, the statement says Environment Southland acknowledges this, and there's plenty of room for individual councillors to have different views about that without changing the overall view of what Environment Southland says. So how are you going to work that out? I don't know. You have to vote on it, I imagine. Which I'm sure, presume you don't want to do, because I find that fair statement.
Just answer very quickly.
Yes, thank you.
And just to say that that's a direct quote from the material that came as part of the government's proposal.
Yeah, that's not
So, yeah, so if the council would rather that we didn't directly quote back the government's
That's the government's quote, it's not our quote, Chair.
Yes, point made, Councillor. Councillor Pemberton, I would quite like to finish off this topic, so if you don't mind, I'll come back to you with Councillor McDonald, is your point about this?
Yes,
Thank you.
I think that should stand. I think we're under 48%. Around 48%. It is what it is. We can discuss the science, and there's not two versions of facts, as far as I'm concerned.
So what the existing or Councillor Roy's suggestion? Thank you. On this topic? Thank you.
I'd just like to support Councillor Roy's position. Just in regards to this, this is the thing I think probably noticed in this topic. I will have some reasonable discussion about where parties stand. So that would be the starting point. So there's a bit of disagreement around community and even world science and these things. So if this is the government's position, we need to make our own position.
Thank you. Councillor Gibson and then Chairman Horrell.
I was speaking to a well-known scientist, really prominent one, at the Dairy NZ meeting held back there, that the science that they're coming up with now is apportioning considerably less of these things towards agriculture. There's new science coming through, so I would back the thing of saying that substantial, don't actually define it.
Thank you. Chairman Horrell and then Councillor Rodway.
Thank you.
Yes, Madam Chair, I would actually support the word significant for a number of reasons, and one of it is most of these government documents are guiding us in a certain direction. So when we affirm back something I'm reasonably against anyway, we actually want to make submissions that might be listened to and heard. Some people picking up that it's going to turn the mic to start. So we don't lose anything by taking the word, because it's actually moved what we're saying. I've got other concerns which we probably wait till I'll reserve to comment on some of the other concerns that I've got about.
Sure, We're still on the first sentence. Could be a long day.
That's what their profile is.
Yes,
Madam
thank you. It's councillor Rodway's.
Madam Chair, thank you. The course that I did through Massey earlier this year on agricultural emissions gave us the data which said that the agricultural proportion made up mainly of methane and nitrous oxide is about 48%, as Peter says. So I think that's pretty recent data. It is an estimate, of course, it can't be that precise. So I think if you say that it is approximately half or just under half, those sorts of words would be would reflect the situation as it is accepted by most authorities on this topic. So I think to just say that substantial is is true, but it's truer to say that it is approximately half.
Thank you, councillor. That might meet with some. No. Okay. Do we need to actually?
Well, I'll test the water
Yeah.
and move an amendment to that first line, which is what I said, that it contributes significantly to Aotearoa New Zealand's total emissions. I'll move that as an amendment to that line.
Thank you, councillor. Do we have a seconder for that amendment? Thank you, councillor Gibson. Anybody like to speak for or against that? Right? Yes. Thank you.
Sorry, just as I don't go on, because my question was around that, so.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah,
Yeah,
so more of a statement that pretty much where we've landed, industry bodies have came back. It looks like, hey, Walker's in the middle, government's out here, the industry bodies have now shifted this way in the last 2 days. So that is pretty much around this discussion. So there's more of a statement than, yep.
Thank you. Two last speakers. Thank you. Councillor McDonald.
Thanks, Madam Chair. This is not accurate. It says contributes over half. Norris is correct. The figure's 48%. We can't have two facts here, people. So it is what it is, and we have to accept it if it is. So I think we've actually got to go back to the basics, and someone's got to put up what are the total emissions coming out of agriculture. And it's pretty tough to take. It might be tough to take, but it is what it is. I don't think that's correct there. But I don't think there's two.
Are you supporting the amendment or not supporting the amendment?
Significantly, yeah, I'll support that. I think it's significant.
Thank you. Councillor Guyton.
Finally, I think great peril here. And there's been a lot of discussion around the influence of farming community on regional council decision making. And this might seem a small thing, and it seems to me we're quibbling. But if we went to a vote and found that all of the farmers in the room voted for a change to this phrase, people might think, and public perception is really important, that there's a conflict of interest. And I would suggest that there really is. Should the farmers be voting on a matter like this? This sentence came from elsewhere, and we're quibbling over the details of it, and I think it's a really bad look. Try and change it, particularly when those who are seeking the change are those who are affected most by it.
Thank you for your perspective.
You're welcome.
Yes, please.
So through you, Chair, I think as we are just on the first line, and there's other things I'm sure that there might be further comments on. Happy to make the adjustment if the majority are comfortable to significantly to, and also would note that there's a climate change item further up on the agenda. And in terms of our emissions profile question, I think that's probably the best route by which council can advance some of those other wider questions, given that this particular item is specific just to our submission in one very important but one live.
Thank you. So we have an amendment on the table. Lucy or Hannah, you're able just to remind us that it's
environment, circle, acknowledges and agriculture contributes significantly to I think there are only names.
Okay, so that is the amendment to that first sentence. Moved by councillor Roy and seconded by councillor Gibson. All those in favour of that amendment, wording amendment, please say aye.
Aye.
Against?
I,
Approved rather than carried. Thank you. Right. Demonstrative of the importance of this work. Councillors, just a procedural thing. If you haven't got your camera on, can you please put your camera on for you Zoom link. Right, the substantive part of the submission, please. Any other guidance? Given that we have some guests, we need to keep flipping through. Any other? Thank you, Chairman Horrell, sorry.
We are talking about recognising governance as. Sequestration, recurring gardens, etc. I think we probably could emphasise that this a bit more because it actually fits in with the other stuff that we do. We encourage recurring planting, encouraging planting in gardens, etc. It's not only about carbon, it's about water quality. And I think we need to be stronger about this. The changes need to be seen to be fair by all the community that we asked to do it. And if we say, oh, the government says, well, we sort of agree, but it's too hard. I think it's not too hard. And I think for something to be accepted, it has to be even-handed. So I'd like to see that a little bit stronger. I'm not sure, sort of following their questions they want, but the other is that we're talking about an annual review of what the numbers are. It creates uncertainty. I mean, we talk about having 5 and 10 year targets. Would actually be quite good to have, suggesting that people put in a 5 year because at least people can plan. If you say, well, you're starting this year, but by the way, next year you don't know what it's going to be. I don't think that helps anybody on the journey.
Thank you. Councillor McPhail.
Where to start, where to stop. But anyway, there's obviously a few here, and I have a conflict of interest, but I'm highly supportive of Hawaki Kanoa in regards to working this together and working a solution out. And there's a few things in here where we've said, and we talk about even revenue recycling, where for that, like this is about making sure the money, it's not going to go into the government coffers. This is about the industry's taking responsibility of their emissions and using it to pump it back into their first research. So I mean, there's a few things here I would be against in regards to how we support revenue recycling. Certainly we need to be every tree should, like when they talk about it getting too complicated to analyse. People want to put shelter belts in instead of riparian planting. I mean, I don't know how they can define they're both the same, a tree's a tree. So there is things that we need to probably go a wee bit harder at them, even the processor level, the levies that they say, well, we'll do an interim in the processor levy, but not at the farm gate. It's just another cost. The government just need to get their A and to G and actually get it set up. This is about, schemes in place. If it's an interim, it's just going to cost, it's going to be a new setup, and the government need to be told that this was a scheme working with them. They just need to get organised, and the farmers the industries are fronted up. It's been a great process, collaborative, and then they've just picked little holes in it, which they talk about it's a bit like taking a leg off a 3-legged stool that all collapses, and this is why we're getting a bit of negative feedback from the farming community, because they think they've done a lot of work towards this. And this is not interim, but this is a scheme that can be worked on. It's something to get in place we can build on. But, so there's a few things through here, and I mean, I've been reading it and trying to understand it. We're saying yes, yes, and I'm probably saying no, no. That we need to challenge them a wee bit more. So I'm just yes.
Councillor, do you have any specific suggestions to make changes to the solution?
Well,
Given that we've workshopped this and the staff have done their best to represent our thoughts already.
Right, so we just need to be a wee bit. I suppose I'm just putting a general theme of things that we don't want to be looking like, but this is all good. I don't know where you can put in where even more support what the process is, how we got here through the May, the proposal that was sent to the government and how it's a collaborative. It was really good talking about the collaborative approach, which Councillor Morrison brought up at the workshop. But there is actually one of the other ones is in trying to provide certainty is about even not reviewing, giving a 5 years window. I know that it's from the levy groups and the farming. Saying people just looking for certainty. They don't want to have this. It's a bit like they don't want to have to start something and they go 2 years down the track, we've got to change again. And this is going on with even what we're doing out in the rural sector. Everybody's looking for certainty, goalposts. So we need to force the issue a wee bit, saying you can't change things like the emissions pricing annually. It just won't lead to good behaviour, or won't people just get switched off? So I mean, it's probably not going to change much because people probably tend to just go with what we've written down here. But I'm just making a point just to be a bit harder against this. There's so much they're throwing at us, and this has been a great system. And it's been really challenging in the rural sectors, but farmer against farmer too, a bit, industry against industry. But they've managed to get something put in play, and then the government's sort of ripped it apart a bit politically for political reasons.
Yes. So through your chair, probably one theme that we could highlight in that first section where we have reference to the partnership work is to say how there was broad support from the council for the partnerships approach and the outputs, given the fact that that's not exactly where the government has landed in terms of taking advice from others. And as you say, they've taken elements some further than others. But we could strengthen that second paragraph of the opening to acknowledge the fact that there was support for both the approach and the recommendations for partnership. The other thing, which might seem like tinkering, but might do what you're asking in terms of not making it look like we're on board with all of it, is where we've included lines that just say answer yes. If they just looked at that, they wouldn't see all the caveats and the qualifiers that we've included as part of the actual definition. So just removing that might help in some cases where it isn't black and white, to remove the appearance of wholehearted support where we have included specific suggestions for improvement. So those two suggestions might address a couple of the points.
So I've got Councillor Roy and then Councillor McDonald.
Cool, thank you, Chair. Look, I think this is basically a good paper. What I want to do is to find solutions to this problem I've been worried about for about 25 years. And I don't think that this is a comprehensive long-term answer. So this pricing of emissions should drive two things that should drive solutions. And one of those solutions is better acknowledgement of sequestration. So pricing should actually do that. And it should drive scientific, robust solutions that are actually going to get us to actually solving the problems. And so I don't know whether we can include that somewhere in there, Lucy, but that's what it should do, is be a solution driver. And I don't actually see that with any strength in the paper. And I think that's picking up some of Jeremy's points as well. Well, I'm not wanting to put words into his mouth, but I just think that's where we need to be looking.
Yes, good point. And Councillor McDonald, thank you.
Madam Chair, yeah, I support the initial collection at the processor while we get the at the farm gate underway, because there's going to be a lot of complication. I can see that. So when we go to here at behind the farm gate, we've got to have everything lined up and have everything ready. pricing, like Eric just said, pricing changes behaviours. It really does. It's the ultimate behavioural change mechanism. So just a general, Jeremy had some general thoughts. I'm going to pop in some of my general thoughts. I think it's politically fraught. I think it's highly emotive issue at the moment. I don't think it's, my view is, I don't know how far it's going to go. But the realities of the marketplace will be borne out. And if it's not going to come through the government, it will come through our processes, which have all signed up to this and all supporting this initiative. So we either do it at the front end or we play catch up through the processes, through auditing and for market access. So.
Okay, so we have a recommendation which is to approve the submission with amendments, I would suggest. And my comment, I guess, is that the fact that we're under time pressure for all these submissions is really unhelpful, and that's also something that we need to keep on at the right people about, because clearly there is a lot of discussion that we still, we could still have on this. And it would be my suggestion that we remind the powers that be that we need suitable deliberative time to get that work done. However, the recommendation is to approve the submission with amendments on the proposal for pricing agricultural emissions. And somebody like to move that recommendation, please.
I'm happy to move in that direction, Madam Chair, and I'm conscious of some of the comments Lucy mentioned about the yeses. We were worried that the 30th, 40,000 submissions and somebody will go through and they'll just go, not read the content and yes, they're all in favour. And that's my real worry, that people put a lot of work into this stuff and actually we want the messages to be picked up and actually acted on.
Thank you. That's a really good suggestion, Lucy. Thank you. We have a mover and a seconder. Thank you, Councillor Gotten. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Carried. Thank you. Just a reminder that you'll get that updated version in your emails quite soon. She said, and
Thank you, Lucy.
hopefully. Please make sure that you respond to Lucy and the team in plenty of time so that it can meet its deadline of Friday. Thank you.
Just a quick question with regard to sending out materials. Are we sure that our Manawatu reps are in the loop and getting all of this information? I don't know if they are or not. That some things can go.
Yes, but we will double check because it never hurts to double check. I would like to suggest a slight change to the agenda because we've got some guests who were going to speak to us at around about 11:35, which was a little while ago. And we still have a couple of other items before them. So I'd quite like, with the meeting's approval, to swap item 7 in now before we cover off the water and land portfolio update. Is there anybody who would have an objection to that? Do we have Rachel leaking it out? Yes. Oh, okay, good, Scott. Oh, she's really not well. Great. Yes, so I'll move that we move, I will move that we move that item. That's weird and very local government, isn't it? Somebody like to second that. Thank you, Chairman Horrell. All those in favour of that change, please say aye. It's carried. Thank you. Right, so I'll hand over to Lucy again. She's everywhere to lead us into that conversation, and then we can perhaps hear from Bobby, I suspect.
Yes, so the item number 7 is our group work plan, and within that includes external agency reports. And we have with us today Bobby Brown and Nick, who I can see too from and more, Neil as well, Neil Thatty, and Amy, who I think is online or was hoping to be on Zoom too. So our guests are with us and they're here to talk a little about Beyond 2025 and also the Enduring Oversight Group. So Neil and Amy are the co-chairs of that oversight group. So invite them to come up and
thanks, Neil. Welcome.
Well, apologies from Amy Kaya, my co-chair. She's had family matters to deal with, so I'm in the hot seat by myself. So I thought it would be helpful to come along and talk. I am mindful, obviously, we've gone through elections, and I'm not sure the context of the background information that everyone is aware of where Just Transitions have been and going to, and whether you want me to spend a little bit of time in that context or just go on to where we're at today. We're seeking some guidance from the floor.
Wouldn't hurt to have a brief.
Yeah, just a very quick.
Okay.
Thanks, Ian.
So on the back of the December 24 announcement from TY, at that point in time, obviously there was significant concern about the economical, environment and social resilience of Southland, and on the back of that announcement and how over-reliant we were on TY. So Just Transitions with local and support through the Mayoral Forum, iwi, and other organisations, together with government, come together and formed what we call the ERG, and Just Transitions. At that stage, it was a great chance to, I suppose, redust off the Swords regional plan, which hopefully everyone was familiar with, and revisit where we were at with that and the process around that. As a consequence of that, 6 work streams were developed at rapid pace as to what things were important to Southland and could be submitted through a plan with the government to get quick and immediate support to progress. They included clean energy work stream, land use work stream, agriculture, business transitions, worker transitions, and community capability. Those work streams have been beavering away over the last 6 months and have basically got their proposals ready. We've submitted those to government in terms of potential funding attached to those. But taking feedback from my perspective and the ERG, it's about what's best for Southland, not necessarily what's best for government in terms of driving a process and an outcome for the long-term benefit of Southland, and making sure that we address the issues around things like over-reliance on TY, how do we decarbonise our economy in the future, how do we increase energy capacity in Southland and keep those jobs in Southland, because the last thing we want to do is export those jobs out of the region. So that's where I suppose we're at today. You're going to hear from Bobby and Nick and her team around Beyond 25, which is effectively the new Swords program. That is, and I won't steal their thunder, a work stream that will carry on to June next year, with the belief that we'll deliver a strong regional plan encompassing a more wider aspect of what other issues out there, likes of housing and other challenges in the environment, to figure out what is the regional plan from that perspective. At the moment, obviously, the ERG was represented by Mayor Hicks and Claire Hadley, and obviously we're working with the Mayoral Forum about what does that new representation look like from local government, and we'll continue those discussions. As I say, we've submitted a number of proposals to government attached to those work streams, things like hydrogen intervention. What does it need to make hydrogen's program work in the New Zealand sector? A couple of work streams around business in terms of engineering clusters and business transformation and innovation through COIN, to figure out how do we actually support those other industries. Hopefully everyone's aware around the agriculture and the submission of the fast tracking process around that work stream, but there's also some funding requests gone to government to keep help that work stream working up its work over the next 12 months. Land use had a couple of work streams that they are working through in terms of food and fibre, poultry plantering, and regional clean energy projects, which are getting funding hopefully through existing sources. And a couple of programs, and there are some other work streams looking for existing funding through existing government. I think that package might be a $10 million package we're putting to government around direct funding over that time. We do have Minister Woods and Minister Robertson here on the 1st of December to carry those discussions on. I suspect everyone's well aware of, as much as we are, that the budget looks tight for next year in terms of the ability to access money, so there's no guarantees in life. But again, I'll go back to that statement, those projects are regionally important to continue on this journey, and how we get the funding for them is, I suppose, a wider discussion at that point in time. I'm happy to pause as I'm talking and take some direct questions attached to where we're at around that. I think the budget doesn't get announced to May next year, so those 6 work streams do have some interim funding to carry them on over that time. It's not a big, large amount, but hopefully keep them energised to keep working through their workloads and keep focused around delivering those. There are a number of outcomes that we face at the moment, which are no TY and hydrogen, and that uncertainty doesn't help try and develop a plan up for the region. But it's outside our destiny, and clearly energy negotiations over the next 3-6 months will dictate where that outcome goes. But there's certainly a lot of interest around other sectors, particularly the agriculture being a massive potential for Southland over the next 5 or 10 years, and the development of hydrogen on a national scale could have some real interest for New Zealand, depending on where government's strategies around energy and such like, and we could dominate that land space if we get it working well. A bit of insight, bit of thoughts from my perspective as co-chair around that, and probably just help to take some questions if there were.
Thanks, Tim. I've got a couple already. Councillor Evans and then Chairman Hall.
So you're saying that there's budgeting available, small budgeting to lead on those work streams. What were the 6 work streams? Looking at hydrogen, other opportunities for TY.
So the 6 work streams that worked up their plan were clean energy. And clean energy came up with about 8 projects. One of those come forward to budget bid. The other 7 are still work in progress, but are not ready or capable.
So understanding that, we're looking for central government to give us some funding, or ourselves to fund to look at those future possible uses. Will we have a large corporate in Meridian that no matter what happens in that space, they will be the benefiter of it? They will be beneficiary.
Yep.
Can we ask them to help?
The lead work stream on that is Murihiku Regenerate, and obviously they've got some discussions going on with obviously international players in the hydrogen space, and I do suspect I'm not party to that. Obviously discussions with the likes of Meridian, Contact and others to try and navigate through that pathway. So that there are
the biggest winners.
Yeah,
really would, and really for them not to be involved would be
So I'd almost guarantee that through Murihiku Regeneration and Otahu, those discussions are happening at that level. Interesting, I expect a lot of these corporates now see the clean energy balance sheet attraction to their space being a driver, which probably wasn't there 5 years ago, and hence the huge appetite for a number of parties.
So is there any actual conversation going on with those parties?
My understanding is there are a couple of commercial deals floating around, but through the AG, we don't have direct access to those negotiations.
Thank you.
Chairman Harold?
Yes, so we just come back from Nelson on the last couple of days, and they built 300 houses last year, probably the strongest growth in the last 12 months. Is something that's been picked up in the refresh of swords is some potential of driving developments, but housing is probably the biggest thing that's going to hold us back. Is there anything substantial going on in that space? Or do we encourage private enterprise, or anybody else to actually do something on a larger scale? I know we've got some developments on the books, but I was staggered by the development and obviously the councils are only putting in the infrastructure of the versus private enterprise. A lot of it comes back and going forward. So yeah, impressed with the amount of housing they've got on the ground in a short time.
Probably two answers to that question. One, housing wasn't in the initial 6 work streams because they need to get ready for budget bid, need to be ready and executable. Obviously, Bobby will pick up the housing discussion when she comes forward in terms of that process. I am aware, obviously, because things like Kanawa Fund will come through EOG, that there are a couple of private enterprises exploring opportunities that we may become aware of shortly around whether that will help accelerate that piece. But it's probably on a longer term radar in terms of that understanding. And there'll be some other infrastructure issues and challenges that we'll need to face as a region to untap potential, I suspect. Probably just housing as well, but I'll leave it for Bobby to comment on where she thinks housing's at in terms of work stream at this stage.
Thanks, Neil. I've got Councillor Rodway and then Councillor McDonald quickly. Thanks.
Oh, hello, thank you. So I hear a few words about hydrogen there, and I just wonder why people are still pursuing this when it's such an inefficient use of power, and there are so many other problems with it. What realistic opportunities are there for development of hydrogen, taking into account the all of these factors, that it really is a poor use of energy?
Well, really outside my skill set, but I will come on two fronts. Clearly, I don't think it's economically viable to get a hydrogen operational at the moment, given the cost of power, etc. So there's a piece around untapping that. The second piece around the commerciality and use piece, probably happy to redirect that back to the clean energy workstream and regenerate targets. So that piece is probably the best avenue to explore the technical aspects of it. We obviously have left that workstream to develop up how they see clean energy, and there are other components likes of wind, offshore ocean generated power, etc., being explored in conjunction with hydrogen is all viable alternatives. Most are still at an early stage at this point in time. Probably doesn't answer your question, but I'm sorry, I can't.
Yeah, all right. No, it was more of a comment, I suppose, so I apologise for that. Thank you.
No problem.
And Curly. Councillor McDonald, thanks.
Morris just asked that question. Oh, you.
Thank you. In the interest of time. Any other questions for Neil on Just Transition? Stuart?
Is wind turbines in scope?
I'm trying to remember back to reviewing the clean energy work streams. I think they were in that context being researched, but I'm not sure whether the works or anything viable at this point in time. Yeah.
Instead of moving ahead in Taranaki, Coast Taranaki.
Indeed, we've got a massive amount of wind opportunities, floating around that I know the power companies are exploring now anyway. Yeah.
That's called out of migratory birds moving around.
Yes.
Great.
My only closing comment would be, I suppose, as we move forward with government, we need to be regionally aligned and making sure those priorities are well understood and we're all talking the same language. If we are going to be successful, the challenge we had in the past is we're sort of the other end of the country and don't carry a lot of votes, so therefore getting that support, it's critical that we are echoing the message's importance, even though potential of TY remaining isn't there, that the urgency of getting on and doing these programs for the betterment of not only, I think, Southland, but the actual New Zealand piece are important, and if we have chances to engage with government around that, it would be helpful to keep that message going up at this point in time.
Yeah, and the social implications of all of that.
Yeah,
absolutely. Thanks, Neil. Appreciate your time. Welcome, Bobby and team. Nick. Sure, there are some details that might come your way, Bobby. Welcome and go for it. Thank you.
So kia ora koutou katoa, Bobby Brown to Karenga. For those that don't know me, there's a few people, new councillors, born and bred in Gore, dairy farmer, 22 years, just put that out there. But I work at Great South, which is the regional development agency for about the past 20 years for that Southland District Council. So I'm a local government animal, but focused on regional development. Nick, do you want to introduce yourself?
Kia ora, ko Nicola Wills tōku ingoa. I've been at Great South for 2 years in destination development, which is around the tourism aspect. I've been seconded to work with Bobby in Beyond 2025 through to June next year. It's an 18-month project. Again, born and bred Southlander from Western Southland, Tautau. So very passionate working on this regional piece of work.
Cool. Okay, so Neil did a really good introduction. I've got a bit of a slide pack and maybe we circulate it later because I think we've probably got 5 minutes and I feel a lot of pressure trying to represent this project, adequately in 5 minutes, to be honest. But I probably want to acknowledge the ES staff that have supported us even to get this project structured the way it is. Because the goal is to ensure that it's an inclusive process so that everybody who needs to be involved is involved and they can see how they fit. The second part is also to ensure that with all the changes, legislation, reform, etc., that the regional development strategy aligns or understands what's going on around it. So you won't get this plan to the side that doesn't understand decarbonisation, Hawaii Kanoa agriculture going into the emissions trading scheme, there's a real effort to ensure that there's alignment. So thank you to Lucy, Rachel, Wilma and staff today. We really appreciate your partnership. I just want to acknowledge iwi as well, because mana whenua through the 4 Papatipu Rūnaka have been very important partners with this approach. We're all wanting the same things. Again, it's just making sure we've got the right processes forward and we don't duplicate energy and time. We're doing good. So I'll just whip through really quick. Yeah, because seriously, I could talk about energy, housing, lots of things quite comprehensively for a wee bit. But I guess
Adrian Walker.
oh look, probably only want to cover a couple of slides, to be honest. Yeah, so that one there, back. This is going to be fun. So sorry, thank you in advance. Yeah, have a look at this one later, because exactly what Neil was talking about, this just, oh, it works now, I think. Yeah, that gives you the structure of how Just Transitions works. And remember, this is only one work stream. Just Transitions is looking if TY closes end of 24. This puts a long-term lens over it and it's called Beyond 25, but it also is the refresh of the regional development strategy from 2015. So just out of interest, there's a couple of slides in here too about what's come out of that. So out of the 51 projects, half are finished, and people don't realise that things like the CBD, the Langlands Hotel, that connects to Auckland 5 days a week are actually part of that plan. It doesn't matter, but it just showed that the plan was successful. There's also that population goal of 7,700 people extra that we've grown since 2015. So remember that 10,000 more people goal. I think it's probably more important now to understand where they're going to live, where we need them, what kind of work they can provide, because that's sort of where we're heading. Okay, so I won't go into that too much. There's one with a whole lot of, what's that mean now?
It's counter.
Yeah, counterintuitive.
Yeah.
Woo. It's not like we haven't done Zoom the last 3 years.
It's time we went to stop.
Oh, you're doing it.
Yeah.
That particular clicker is particularly challenging, to be fair.
Look, just this slide, probably all it shows is that we are and continue to be a powerhouse. So with 15% of all the tradable exports coming out of the region, we are very important nationally, and see that increase of a couple of billion there since Swords came out, quite important. Thinking of a static population now and 12% of New Zealand's land mass, under 2% of population, we've got some unique challenges that will need to be taken into consideration when we look at what we do next. Okie dokie, I won't talk about all that, you can have a wee look. Yeah, scary figure, 2.7% unemployment. So pretty much that's a structural baseline. Everyone who can work is working, you know. So that just means when we look at and we listen to our 14,000 businesses who are looking for workers, we've got to actually be pragmatic about where do they come from and where do they live, where do we need them and when do we need them, and is there a prioritisation? So that's sort of what is happening within the plan. We're trying to get the data to then inform this specifically, rather than just that blanket, woe is us, we're really short of people.
Quick question, what's under the utilisation rate?
So just people that could be brought into the workforce.
But they're not unemployed, or they are employed, they are there.
Yeah, correct. Yes, so that, and remember, we're not solving everything with this. There's agencies and others that are working really hard in the space. So this is a partnership with central government and others. Cool, moving on. This is the turbo version, sorry guys. Yep, we'll move on from that one. You know all this. We won't go near the Swords ones. That's sort of what I said. Right, that one. So if you look at nothing else, this is the snapshot of how the Beyond 2025 plan will be structured. So from Swords, we've used that foundation, but we've added 2 important columns: environment and climate change, which covers land, water, and carbon, and in particular the net zero Southland aspirations towards 2050. And the other column is resources and infrastructure. And there's some big things in there. And what we're saying is if you're thinking about the future of the region, you've got to make sure your foundations are there on which industry and people will thrive. So things like housing, transport, making sure your cell phone and there's internet connection, and the big one, which is future energy. Okay, and all this other stuff too around diversification of the economy. So we're still looking at things like aquaculture, tourism. Before COVID, that was worth 700 million to the economy. It's rebounding quite nicely in some places. Technology and manufacturing, so things like having a globally significant ground station in Aotearoa. You know, you do have the internet in Southland. You know, there are innovation and opportunities to be based here. And of course, there's another one in there about land use, future crops and food, which links into what Neil said before around the Just Transitions work. Again, sorry, I'm going over this really lightly. Primary sector in the middle. So that strengthening local business is us saying, look, there's some big stuff happening long term, but there's 14,000 businesses, which are pretty much the engine room of the Southland economy. They've been through a pretty tough time with COVID. We need to actually just make sure we don't forget them. And in the short term, they have support or whatever they need to operate. So there's a bit of work going on with the chamber and others to just work out how they go and what they need, what's already there. Split into two, primary sector and everyone else. That's because primary sector, look, I'm a farmer, I get it, what's going on, but it's pretty fraught right now. So we're just conscious of that and the importance of agriculture to our region, thinking that 70% of their GDP is exported. And of that, most of it is primary sector or farming related. So it's really important, arguably more than Tiwai. Didn't say that out loud.
Can I just make a comment on that employment? And we're talking about we can't fill the spaces. We're an island in the middle of the Pacific. We've got major problems around that. Are we seeing the start of full-on automation actually starting to take over our economy? Is this going to be a growing problem? Are we just applying the same thinking, we must get more people, or should we be taking this from a different angle?
Not really good. So we call them disruptors, and automation is one, but there's quite a few other things. You know, God forbid, as a dairy farmer, that you could actually have plant-based milk options in the future and not have to worry about heavy transport on our roads. So there's another bit of work to the side of this where we contracted Infometrics with support of the Forunaka and the councils, and it's going to help feed into your LTPs. And we're looking at three things. We're looking at getting a baseline source of truth right now about information about our communities, because sometimes it can be quite different depending on how you collect the data. The second bit is where we're looking at, based on certain assumptions, projecting population in key places. So high night caps, because we can think of changes with energy, mining, etc. We want to actually have a peg in the sand to say what's the population going to be. So that's going to impact them. What kind of infrastructure, thinking of the councils with spatial planning into the RMA. And the third thing, which answers your question, is we will identify different disruptors or key impacts on the region, and we'll model them according to things like GDP, impact on workforce, impact on services, infrastructure. So remember, our GDP is about 7.3 billion. So this isn't the SIT to Pukenga level, that's too low. It's the things like the impact of carbon forestry on the primary sector. So modelling that out, or things like agriculture going to the emissions trading scheme, TY closing at a certain date. So what we're trying to do is put a peg in the sand and actually say, if that happened, it would have these consequences. So all that will be looked at more, but it's sort of like a bit of a trying to do it step by step.
Just a supplementary question, really quickly, COVID and climate change coming together to change the way people view this end of the country. Look, I'm talking that international effect, people piling in and wanting to put their futures in this place. Is that some sort of thinking around that? Have you made assumptions on that, or where we'll be in 50 years' time?
That'll be totally included in this. And under the attraction retention work stream, so that fifth column is all about people, which is why we're doing this. All that's getting factored in. So that 2.7% unemployment, what does that actually mean in terms of how we use the place of Southland to say to people, come work and live here, whether it's kids, whether it's people wanting a change of life. And so one of the things out of that, for example, is we've interviewed about 150 businesses, and we've actually said to them, how important is recruitment? Are you having issues? So we're trying to get the data, because we're not going to solve all the problems through this plan. But think of it like a big jigsaw and all the other work that people are doing. We're just trying to make it all put together so it makes sense. But I mean, sorry, I'm rushing over this. And if I've got 2 more minutes,
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. There's 5 pillars, and each of these just give you a high level view of what, and hopefully you agree it's quite inclusive. We have been, for about the last 6 or 7 months, way more than we thought, it's been socialising this process. So it's not a Great South plan, like this is a regional plan which is just being facilitated by Great South. So that just means that there's a whole lot of other people in their mahi which actually get included in this, and they will do the implementation. So the climate change, the next slide talks about diversification. And this is really important with Tiwai. We've got a lot of eggs in some baskets. So how do we just make sure we protect the future of the region? The next one was, like I was saying, about those 14,000 businesses. Most of those are small guys. So that creates unique challenges too. The 4th one is what I talked about with resources and infrastructure. So yeah, it's got to go hand in hand with regional development. We've got to make sure infrastructure is fit for purpose, and infrastructure is a big word. And again, that goes back to that, I don't want to say guessing, but those population, demographic, scenario things that we just need to be aligned on. And the last one is people. Then probably the 2 extra things I just want to say are really quick. The next few slides talk about housing. There's a big bit of work on housing. Rachel has been supporting us with Anchor as well. Again, where we saw that we fitted was to get the data. So that would help inform evidence-based decision making. So there are, the next slide shows, next slide shows 5 different bits, and this will all be finished by February next year. So we will be able to give you, or everybody, the councils will go to first in Mana Whenua, a stock take of every dwelling in the region at a regional council area down to the different 14 localities, which the councils have given us. So these slot straight into our LTPs. The second bit is then we will do a full desktop review of all the data. So whatever's been done, we'll just make it all make sense or not. So everyone feels like their stuff's included. There's some workshops with property developers, social transitional housing providers to make sure they get their input. And at the moment, there's a community housing survey which is out. This is the 3rd bit, and please fill it in, because we're going to have the data, we're going to know who lives where, what houses there are, but what we need to know is where these people want to live in the future and what is going to drive them to shift. Because that then goes with the other stuff. We put it all together, and then we can say to the councils or whoever, yes, a lot of people want to retire to Winton, and then they look at that and go, right, how does that fit with how we zone land? Or so we've had it open for 2 days. We've had just under 300 responses. So it's definitely a topic of high interest.
Usage for housing, usage, is that part of that,
Usage in terms of?
Accommodation home, holiday home, all of those sorts of things.
Yeah, spot on. And we've been talking to your guys here around your air quality, thinking of installation and quality of housing. So it's not just a numbers game of, oh, I've got houses here, but actually they might not be fit for purpose. So that's a tricky one with the building code. We're trying to get as much as we can here. They'll bring in that peer-to-peer stuff as well, which is another issue in some places. Okay, and just finally the energy on Net Zero Southland. God, I could talk for an hour on that one, but we all know that we're not on track. The region produces or contributes 9.7% of New Zealand's gross emissions. So while I talked about how we're this big player in terms of travel exports, there is another side of that, but we have got a plan with the Net Zero Southland report, which specifically talks about 15 recommendations and an abatement pathway, which is actually underway already. So that pathway, and I'd advise like Steve Kenny and others are facilitating this, but there's a macro and a micro view with this. So from helping businesses, thinking of the partnership with ECA and the RETA program. So there's 53 large businesses who've already contributed significant capital investment to boilers thinking of the fossil fuel boilers having to be gone by 2037, 50% funded at the moment. So we're trying to get Southland ahead of the game, so it's not sort of like we get to 2036 and it's like, so like there's quite a bit happening in that space.
Can we still use that graph with that cliff there that's opposing the Tiwai?
I think we'll get you some updated ones. Yeah, and then I'm kind of weary because it changes so quick and we just, okay, and sorry, energy. So Neil sort of touched on it good. The important bit about energy in our work stream is partnering with Marahuku Regen. It's making sure we articulate Southland's needs now and into the future, because all of these things we need are going to need energy. And we are generators of energy in the south, and obviously there's a big need for it up north, and how they get there is a challenge. So with the National Energy Strategy being activated in Wellington at the moment, it's really important if we want to decarbonise our economy. It's going to take time to get biomass and other options up to scale. We're going to need power. If we want to have things like data centres, so the data grid and the T4 data centre require the equivalent of what Tiwai uses, 600 megawatts at the moment. So again, it becomes a puzzle about power. And so what this is doing, it's an independent objective process, which allows all involved in the sector to be involved in a process. And there's lots of work going on around looking at future demand projections based on scenarios. Again, that scenario bit of work I talked about, that comes into here. So we're talking apples and oranges. But also it will look at all different renewable energy sources, including hydro, etc. Oh, that's a very dumbed down version of that. Very, very important piece of work. But Southland's voice, robust, inclusive process, you can trust what comes out of it. Oh. Sorry, hopefully I could talk about so much more, but.
Yeah, I was just going to say, we probably need to get you back for a properly long session.
Quite passionate about it.
It's my home too. Yeah, and there's some good stuff going on.
Lots going on. Also,
it's just, we've got an opportunity to plan and we've got to do it together, like I think that's what we all said before.
Yeah.
And it's perfect with all the legislation changes because you can actually combine the other way around. Okay.
Fabulous. And we'll look forward to getting the slides. Then we'll get you back, no doubt, because then we can ask you about the slides that we don't understand. Thank you very much for your time and thanks for your patience as well, everybody. So we'll finish off the water and land. Is there anything from that item 7 that else? Anything else? Item 7? So we're still in item 7, which we move forward, of course. So if there are any other questions about any of the other material in the agenda and the work program, now is the time.
There's a comment, Madam Chair. I think we may have a bit more clarity after the minister on the first. I suspect some of the funding, some of these things may be pared back. We'll have to wait and see, but comprehensive work going on, like the strategic stuff that we're going to serve as well. But you're right, I think we're going to need more information going forward.
Thank you. I'm just drawing your attention, I guess, to pages 86, 87, 88. The fact that there is a lot in progress. Thanks, Shane. There's a lot in progress. Anything from those lists that anybody had a question about?
Lucy, anything in particular she'd like
Yeah,
to highlight?
anything?
I'm chair. I'm happy to answer any questions, but I think some of the things I would draw attention to might get covered in the water and land item.
Yep.
Otherwise, we've also got the climate change item to come, so I'll draw attention to that one as well.
Yep.
Thank you.
So the recommendation for item 7 is that we note the strategy, policy and engagement group work plan, including the external agency reports. Thank you, Councillor McPhail. Seconded, Councillor Evans. All those in favour, please say aye. Against? Carried. Beautiful. Right, flipping back to item 4, please, which is the water and land Take it away.
With me again.
Yes, thank you.
The benefits of Rachel and I doing this jointly is that when she is not particularly well, I can help, but it does mean that we're hearing a lot from me. So the water and land portfolio update item, this is a standing item for this committee, so you'll see that one of these at every
It's us each time.
Patches sneaks up on you. So it's to provide an update with the work that is happening in this particular portfolio in between meetings. The one that's before you today includes a raft of things that are new for lots of you, but also hopefully for previous council, none of it's a galloping shock. We've touched on a number of really important, significant work streams in here, and I acknowledge that they are light touch. We haven't had an opportunity yet to have a water and land induction session, but that has been teed up for before Christmas. So there will be an opportunity for council to talk more in detail on these items. That being said, I'm very happy to answer questions, and I just highlight a couple of points. One around the appeals. People may have seen a very lengthy article today that was released on, I think, on Newsroom in relation to the Environment Court hearing, and that's happening this week. So I'm obviously not there right now, but it started on Monday. We finished with opening legal submissions yesterday, and we're starting with witnesses. It's due to go until at least the end of the week. The judge has allowed 2 extra days next week, and has also penciled in a couple of other days. The matters before the court this week relate purely to the Meridian and Waiau related appeal points. So we are on tranche 3. We also got a minute from the judge last week, or possibly the week before, to say that her decision is expected before Christmas, but she didn't say which Christmas to your comments. So that's the appeals related element. The pilot is advancing at pace in terms of the farm plan work, and we'll come back and provide you with an update on the outputs from that at the induction session. And I've also touched on the feedback that we've received in relation to the visions, the draft visions that went out for the regional policy statement. So given the matters that are within the item, I'm happy to take questions. Your hands.
Councillor File.
Yes. Reading through all this and then getting on the plan change to Tuatahi and then looking at all the MPSs that are kind of come into play, and I'm sitting there scratching my head, working it all out, and then I was looking, how does the community understand this? It's quite mind-boggling what is getting thrown at us. Just trying to work out how you communicate with all this stuff, and in a way that our community can understand why things are getting changed and altered, and because they think, oh yeah, we're going to get this appeals done, this plan, and all of a sudden we do another plan change, and then you've got to take in high productive land and biodiversity, urban development. You know, it is quite a struggle to get your head around. I mean, it's just a statement. I was going, God, the workload, and that puts pressure on us to get people, you know, and all these. It's quite staggering, really. That's not probably not, yeah, yes, it's a good answer.
Yes.
And then actually telling the community and explaining to the community, well, this is what's going on. We've got this sorted, but no, we've got to make a tweak here, got to make a tweak here. And obviously plan change to Tuatahi, you wanting to push it out 6 months or because of that workload. And,
exactly that. Exactly.
It's just more of a statement.
So through you, Chair, just on the time frame, one of the reasons why the additional timing will be incredibly helpful is because a lot of the feedback that we got from the visions work was that the community and stakeholders too were grappling with how they translate into actual rules. What do they look like? And so by putting the two changes together and calling it all plan change to Tuatahi and giving ourselves a bit of extra room, we'll do the regional policy statement change and the water plan change at the same time. So the community and everybody can understand the line between those two things, the visions, and then how we get there. So it's very deliberate and acknowledging, yes, there is a lot of work to.
And also adding that still puts us ahead of the time frame, the required time frame, which is super important because there could still be Thanks. Councillor Guyton, did you have a question?
Just to Councillor McPhail's point there about the complexity and the challenges. I think as I mean, this is happening everywhere, isn't it? On every level and every sphere. But as governors, I feel that it's our role not to throw our hands up in the air and say it's crazy, it's mad, stuff's being chucked at us. But we're the ones who are supposed to steady the waka, smooth the waters by our behaviour. And I think that's what our role is. That's what we put our hand up to do. I know that that's challenging, but we have to bear in mind that not to just be reactive and all shaken up by it, but that's how I feel. You may not do, but I think that is our role, is to maintain our heads.
I think, just to respond, I'm not saying, no, throw it away. I'm just saying it is, I'm just trying to say, how do we communicate this? I'm not saying we're not going to do it.
Yes, you can.
You can lead the discussion, but it's just trying to adapting. It's going to take longer for the community to adapt, so we just need to understand that.
Thank you. Chairman Horrell and then me.
Yes, Madam Chair, on the farm plans, I had a call from someone who was very concerned that we were going to frame them up in conjunction with iwi and send them off without any consultation. And I assured them that actually we've got a real opportunity here and we will be running some of the stuff past farmers passing because we want something that's going to work. And, I don't think I was out of line saying that for this particular person because this is an important piece of work and we know the value of farm plans and down here we've got common sense hopefully to come up with a template that might be eagerly welcome and accepted by NEB and government.
Just on that specific point, and to the previous comments about complexity. So the farm plan pilot that we're currently a part of is testing the national regulations that are to come. We're one of 3 regions that are testing that national new structure, and we're testing all of the elements from it from start to finish. So the template all the way through to the auditing function. We're doing it in chunks, so it'd be really good to come. And as I said, we'll talk more about what we've learned and what we've taken from it, and we've been doing it in partnership. But I would just note that the content of our farm plan and what we've been testing as part of the pilot is already in our plan in Appendix N. So the work that has been done to regionalise what goes into a farm plan in Southland Ruahikadu sits within our plan, and that will continue. So we will be able to regionalise the national regulations that come in terms of the content of the plan, and there are other elements of the structure that we get to define. So all of that's going to be a live topic because we're likely to get the regulations turned on next year, is what the cabinet decision showed. So we get the pilot done, come back to you and let you know what we've learned, and then early in the new year we're going to be talking to you about what you want to do with it. So yeah, you will.
We're working towards that sort of like farm plan. We will have some external input once we come up with a straw man sort of thing.
I need to make my comment to action. So if there are no further questions, would somebody like to move the recommendation, please? Noting that we are approving the extended scope and altered time frame. Councillor McPhail, seconded Chairman Horrell, all those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Carried, thank you. Item 5. Thank you, Anka. Come and join us and tell us about climate change and community resilience. Oh, Nikki, thanks, Nikki. Councillors, I'm aware of the time. And I'm just checking that the next meeting we have is 1:30, correct? So we'll have plenty of time for lunch and a break. I'm telling you, we will have time for lunch. Thanks, Anka.
Fasting is good for the soul.
For those that don't know me, my name is Anka Hepgood. I'm Strategy Advisor here at Environment Southland. Rebecca Blythe was going to co-present this with me from Te Marama, and she's had to go away to court mediation, so he's stepping in on. Thanks, Nikki. Just keen to highlight a few aspects of the climate change portfolio update. First, I'll put a little bit of background information in the report in terms of there's a lot that's been happening in the space in the last 6 months. And one particular milestone was the interagency climate change HUI that took place in July this year. A lot of you guys were here for that. And one of the key things that came out of that was the agreement or the indication that we should be initiating an interagency approach to tackling climate change. So in some ways, climate change is a big thing to get your head around, and the government direction has helpfully split that into having a national emissions reduction plan and a national adaptation plan. And so it's quite helpful to be thinking of those as two streams of work. And so that's sort of how it's falling into place at an organisational level as well. So we've had, in terms of progress on this, we've had our first staff level interagency climate change working group meeting last month, and the second one was just this morning. That's basically Environment Southland and Te Ao Marama are co-leading, co-designing that process at this stage, and the representation was also there from Gore District Council, Invercargill City Council and Southland District Council. We're basically at the stage of trying to understand where each agency is at, drafting up initial terms of reference and some early thinking about what we can be doing to work together at a staff level. When this group was initially set up, this was post that HUI, it was coming closer and closer to election. So the original intention always was to have governance representation as part of this interagency working group as well. But the calling of those nominations got held off because we just thought that it would be more practical to wait for elections and let that roll through. So actually the letter calling for governance nominations, from my understanding, Councillor Ludlow's just signed it out today. So that letter is going to our partner agencies, calling for each of those agencies to nominate somebody at a governance level that can be a part of this interagency climate change working group as well. In addition, so that basically comes to one of the suggested resolutions in this paper, is that essentially we need to have an Environment Southland governance nomination as well. So one of the suggestions is that subcommittee has already been created. So at their first subcommittee meeting, which will be, I think off the top of my head, 13th of December, that they'll have to go through a process of nominating a chair, and that potentially that chair would be it would make most sense for that chair to then become the governance nomination for Environment Southland as well. But that's something that you guys, probably over to you guys to work through. The only other things to point out is that just before elections, we had a subcommittee workshop, and Dean Fraser from Ngāi Tahu came in and spoke with us and specifically talked the subcommittee through the Ngāi Tahu strategy and action plan. It's a really constructive and useful discussion. So that's something just to note that that's happened, and there will be an induction for the subcommittee coming up soon, and then also the first subcommittee meeting on the 13th of December. And then once that governance nomination has been sorted, the idea is that early in the new year, we'll hit the ground running. We'll have the first interagency working group that has both governance and staff level representation, and hopefully hit the ground running next year. So, and otherwise, happy to take questions.
Thanks. Councillor McDonald, sorry.
So initial thoughts were, and the language was around a cross-council committee. Now we're working towards a working group. So has there been any change? The words are different, that's all I'm trying to say. So has there been any change in thought?
Not specifically about what would be the difference. It's something that once those nominated people come together, we'll be able to just nut out a wee bit further and tease out a wee bit further what exact level this group is going to be operating at. So I guess maybe the term working group is probably comes from the fact that at a staff level, that's kind of how it feels at the moment. But once that governance level comes into it, then that's got to be all fleshed out.
Councillor Guyton.
Thank you. Jim. You just in terms of proportionality of staff to governors, what are you expecting in the groups? Are going to be 4 or 5 governors and 150 staff?
Officially, there's one staff nomination per agency, though in practice, like at this morning's meeting, there were a couple of agencies that had a couple of staff there, and it was purely because of the subject matter on the agenda. So officially, I guess you could say that there would be a 1-to-1 ratio staff to governance, but in practice, that may need a little bit of flexibility depending on what was being worked through. Sometimes we need to draw in staff that have got a particular expertise to contribute to the discussion.
Sure, of course. Thank you.
Any other questions?
Move recommendation. Chair, is there further? There's another slide.
Councillor Maldonado, are you second or questioning?
No, just the last question.
Yeah, sure.
Their partners bringing a budget to the table. Is there a feeling that this is a yes thing? We're just coming along to listen, but you're going to do it all? Or...
Yeah, so again, I think that's something that has to be worked through at the end of the day. Yeah, to just come to a collective agreement on what those expectations are and then what that means in terms of funding implications as well. So this is not something that's going to be sort of within a month or two. These are conversations that need to build on each other and place it.
But an excellent question, councillor, in my opinion. Nikki?
If I may just respond to that, I think the timing works quite well, setting up those governance structures and lining up their next LTP. So, yeah, whilst I'm not sure if that, but whilst, yeah, those discussions I'm not aware of, this is time to have those to position well for that, for a collective response through the LTP cycle.
Thank you. Fantastic. We have a mover, Jim Norrell, seconded councillor Cook. All those in favour, please say aye. Against? Carried. Thank you very much. Thanks, Anka and Nikki. And the ever patient new one is going to give us our science update, which is on 6. And Karen. Thanks, Karen. Jean.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to give a really quick context, particularly with new councillors in the room. So I think it was about this time last year, a request come to staff from this committee to start providing regular updates on different aspects of the science program, just to provide greater transparency around what was happening in the science program. So over this year, we've provided updates on the water shortage, hydrology monitoring program, wetlands, river water quality, inequality, groundwater, and this is the next one in that sequence. This is around lakes. We would normally provide a short presentation to this committee, but in the interest of time, we won't be doing that today. We will maybe video one later and send it around. But no one is here to answer any questions on the update that we've provided, if you have any.
Thanks. Councillor Guyton?
Just a question about David Parker and his proposals. I noticed that estuaries feature quite large. Do lakes?
Not really, actually. Yes, but so the national policy statement several new attributes for the lakes. So one is that lake spy. Spy means submerged plant index. So we did historically past we did surveys macrophytes in lakes, but now at the moment that program is on hold. Yeah.
Any other questions?
We're a wee bit fatigued, Chair. It's a very good report, but yeah. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. I don't have to confess that I had to look like George up because I wasn't sure who it was, but I know now. I'm sorry. See, we're learning every day.
I'll put my hand up there too, so I don't stand alone.
The staff Christmas dinner, Lake George.
Well, sounds good to me. Oh, you went, that's right. Any questions for the team? Thanks very much for putting that work together. Hang on, we might have a question.
I was just, I don't, it takes a long time for the trends to change, but I know we've got some of those state, but it'll be too soon to say whether we're moving in a new direction, I guess, thinking of the.
Any obvious trends?
Otago Regional Council have announced that they're doing.
Yes, actually. So the lake monitoring programs, currently we are monitoring seven lakes. So including some deep lakes, shallow lakes and lagoons. So the trend actually shows that the shallow lakes or lowland lakes are in poor condition in terms of water quality. And then our deep lakes like Lake Manapuri and Tiano, they are in moderate condition in terms of the ecology. Ecology mean actually mainly the in terms of macrophytes in lakes. There are those Tiano and Manapuri lakes. Actually, we have problems with invasive species, invasive macrophytes. Other than the water quality, in terms of water quality, those deep lakes are in very good condition. And most of our other lakes are in natural state and they are in the Fiordland National Park.
Councillor Evans.
So I know Aurora Lakes aren't included in that. Lake Gun, Lake Fergus, which are quite important.
Yes, actually, we did some, historically, we did some surveys around Maora Lake, but currently it's not included because the reason is actually currently from the water quality perspective or ecological perspectives, we haven't observed any significant issues with those lakes. That's why we are not currently monitoring that one.
Sorry, just another question. Is the information that we gather regarding those lakes shared with the Guardian of the Lakes? Do we sit on any meetings with the Guardian of the Lakes?
So yes, we do sit with Guardians of the Lakes, and so we have reinvigorated that relationship in the last wee while to ensure that they are fully engaged in terms of what's coming next as well. So those lines are open.
Thank you for that. So just from my understanding, because I've been contacted by the chair of the Guardian of the Lakes, and I just needed to know what we share with them so that I have a better understanding if I'm going to be.
We can help with more detail on that as well. Like in terms of what we spoke, we had a meeting with them, Bruce and I, the present manager, and I had a meeting with them, I'm going to say 3 months ago, I think it was been pre-election, and we agreed as part of that a number of actions and to meet again in a more regular way, like we do with the other guardians. Potentially, we can certainly talk. Let's talk offline.
Just in the same.
We can certainly agree.
Questions? Thank you, Councillor Roy, seconded. Councillor Evans, all those in favour, please say aye. Yes. Carried. Thank you very much, Nuan. It takes us to item 11, which is extraordinary and urgent business, and I've just been notified that we have an extraordinary item. Is correct.
We should read briefly invite to you while Ellie was here at the beginning of the meeting because it relates to matters via security, but we've only just got the approved statements through from the parties, so I'd like to brief you on a matter relating to discipline.
So thank you.
Helpful. Yeah, is that okay?
Yes.
Helpful with the conversation this morning, as the CEO has alluded to give you this information. I think maybe the CEO's update might have come to him. Well, yeah, okay. So you're getting this slightly ahead of time. We've on the 8th of November, we were informed by the Department of Conservation that they had staff working on Resolution Island, and they spotted what they thought was Undaria. Now Undaria is not supposed to be in that area. You know that we've got an exercise or work that we do in Breaksea. Luckily, we could get the divers down to identify Undaria, and we've confirmed that occasion it was Undaria. So since the 8th of November, we were working to understand the extent of the spread, and we're continuing to work on that. We've informed our partners, which are Biosecurity New Zealand, Department of Conservation, and the Fiordland Marine Guardians. They're aware of the situation. We'll continue to go to do some monitoring to understand the extent of the spread. It's uncertain to us at this moment whether it's come from a vessel or it's been spread through the tidal sort of way from Breaksea. That we might not know that for some time. The idea of the work that we're doing with the divers is to understand the extent of the spread, so that we can come back with a plan to resolve it in some way. We've had experiences of this before, where there was a discovery in Chalky Inlet in 2019, which has been brought under control and is looking good for full elimination from North Pole. So we have experience of this. As you know, we're working in Breaksea, but I just thought it was important to give you that update and then speak more widely.
Thank you. Any questions? Councillor Evans.
Resolution Island, it's a big area, inland, coastal.
It was on the
to the arms.
Yeah, it was on the bottom. So it was on the bottom.
Different passage.
Yeah. Yeah.
This is the other one, arms down.
So it is inland, and
Yes, quite far in.
So yeah, we've been working hard on it since the 8th of November. We've since identified it. We'll continue to do the surveying so we can figure out the extent. And no doubt we'll be back with an update as to what we need to do next. And of course, speaking to our partners all the way through.
Given that today is the 16th, it's swift movement, I think. Thanks for that. Any questions? Resolution or noting that report?
Move it be noted.
Thank you, Councillor Roy. Speaking to Chairman Morrell, all those in favour, please say aye. Against, carried. And somewhat extraordinarily, we have no public excluded business, which means we have come to the conclusion